In the Dark Ages, there was a creator god who made all things in the world. He had a demon as a partner, and that demon, out of resentment, loathed everything the god had created. The demon created a being that cursed all things. Its name was Malum. Afterwards, before its frenzied power, he destroyed all helpless living creatures. But to everyone's surprise, a woman endowed with the power to fight back appeared. She used divine power to destroy Malum, saving the world from darkness. People undoubtedly worshipped this woman, calling her the Saintess. From that day on, the king established a Grisha in honor of the Saintess. Many years have passed since then, and now a girl embodies the power of the gods. Her name is Violet, a name derived from a beautiful flower. At this moment, she is on a balcony playing a game with the man she is talking to. He is Ermengarde, the fellow with whom she has a complicated relationship. The Saintess smiled and asked if she should congratulate him on his victory. She offered some options, but he believed none of them were sincere. The girl closed her eyes and admitted that he had a point. Esselman watched her with a cold gaze, asking if she felt anything at all. When he told her she belonged to the temple, she raised her hands. From now on, the girl played along, asking if she should thank them for becoming her family. Despite the warm words, the Saintess's sarcastic tone betrayed her. She looked away, asking why he was bringing this up now. The man just watched her expressionlessly, while she smiled slyly like a fox. She left him with that smile, telling him not to be nervous. With utter arrogance, the Saintess declared that she had no intention of going to the temple meekly. With that, she ended their conversation and returned to the party. Violet began to talk with the man who had adopted her, the one who was like a father to her. When Cardinal Cassar Tigernan walked into the hall, everyone froze. His cunning, amber eyes locked directly onto her. The priest announced that from now on, she must stay away from the world she knew. She had to leave her castle and follow the cardinal to become a member of the temple. He added dramatically that she would now praise God. Cesare smiled smugly, watching to see how the Saintess would react. He spoke to her first, demanding to know the approximate date of her departure for the temple. After a short pause, she announced that she would be making a bold statement. She said she was unworthy of the holy seat, which shocked everyone. Her statement was so outrageous that everyone's jaws were about to drop. She claimed that she was currently unable to use her God-given power. Violet said this while looking straight into Cardinal Cassar's eyes. He definitely hadn't expected her to withdraw so cleverly. One of the priests accused her of lying to avoid going to the temple. She simply said that if they didn't believe her, they could see for themselves. The priest hesitated, realizing this would be a real problem. But Cesare decided to take it as a challenge and went straight up to her. He slowly extended his hand, reaching for the Saintess. To his surprise, he truly could not detect any divine power in her. He concluded that she had planned it all from the beginning. The girl pushed his hand away, saying there was no reason to celebrate her coming of age. She blamed it on her humble origins, claiming it had angered the gods. The Saintess offered her sincere apologies, but her smile suggested otherwise. Many people thought that being a Saintess meant you were of noble birth. But to those in power, she was just a pawn on a chessboard. Everyone tried to control her to consolidate their own power. She had no power to fight them alone, but she refused to yield. Saintess Violet had no intention of becoming another pawn in someone else's game. As she left the banquet hall, she cursed this miserable world again. No one knew what she had been through to get to this point. She remembered again the dream that started it all. As a child, she was wandering in an endless field. She turned around to see an evil spirit, apparently ecstatic to have finally found her. In that voice, endless joy was mixed with tears. She could feel that the being wanted to possess her completely. Violet wanted to run as far as she could, but she couldn't move. She was frozen in place, watching as the black claws reached for her body. The monster devoured her, as if wanting to become a part of her. She woke up after the monster told her she could never escape. Then, the ill-tempered old hag who had taken in the orphans started yelling at her again. She scolded Violet for being ungrateful and threatened to make her suffer. The old woman rambled on about where she would have ended up if not for her kindness. Violet clasped her trembling hands, scared out of her wits. The old woman finally left only after she lowered her head. The door slammed shut, heralding the start of another difficult day. Ever since she was a child, poor Violet had been having the same damn dream. In the dream, a voice kept calling to her. At first, it felt nice, making her want to get closer to it. But then, she would get goosebumps every time and run for her life. Tonight, however, that voice finally caught up with her. She couldn't escape and was completely devoured. Waking from the nightmare, the girl staggered downstairs. The pretty girl, Lena, asked her if that old hag had hit her again. The girl said it was her own fault and was met with a gentle pat on the head. Violet looked at her roommate and asked if she was okay. She said she was fine, then wondered again how anyone could bring themselves to hit her. Violet often grabbed the old hag's hand, and only the girls felt sorry for her. The moment she flinched from the touch, Lena immediately worried for her. The girl froze when another woman's voice called her back to work. That girl was Rose, stern and intimidating, all thanks to the old woman's slaps. Seeing Lena walk away, she called her over to help. The blonde girl started begging for a day off, but Rose wouldn't have it. They called this place Flower Street, a code name for the brothel. The girls on this street all had flower names. That was the rule. That was how she got the name Violet. Even the madam, despite her old age, still took clients. The street was a complete cesspool where morality was non-existent. Every night, girls as beautiful as flowers were tormented here. Men tore off their splendid petals for next to nothing. They constantly abused them, sometimes even ravaging them to death. This was exactly the future that little Violet faced. In the morning, they gathered for breakfast, sharing their worries. Frisia started talking about the priests who were regular clients. All she did was fantasize about her noble knight. They noticed a sad companion who looked like she had encountered a real pervert. Just because he was a priest didn't stop him from doing some extremely perverted things. Finally, the girl screamed, not believing this was supposed to be some holy kingdom. Lydia sobbed, not understanding why the Saintess doesn't appear to save them. She wiped away her tears and asked a string of similar questions. Rose just answered cynically that God had long since abandoned them. She put down a glass of wine, adding that he probably wouldn't save lowly people like them. The bruised and battered Violet lowered her head, lost in thought. Just one look at her, and Lydia started to worry. Rose glanced at the girl and asked what problem she could possibly have. She added that with a pretty face like that, she could easily make a living. The girls agreed, saying she had the most beautiful eyes. They showered the child with praise, making her blush profusely. Rose held Violet in a tight embrace, just like a mother. She looked at her, calling them their only chance of survival. The girl asked if she thought they were dirty, or something. Violet thought they were as beautiful as the sweetest flowers. Even if people pointed fingers, their hearts were pure and kind. To this girl, they were the most beautiful people in the world. She loved being with them and saw them as her own sisters. Sadly, their happiness lasted until the old hag showed up. The woman looked like she was about to burn them to a crisp with her death glare. You could see the fear creep onto their faces as they realized what was about to happen. Rose tried to stop her, but she practically lunged at Violet. The next thing she knew, she viciously backhanded the girl. She roared, asking if she thought she was joking. She ignored everyone saying the girl hadn't even been drinking. The old woman lifted her leg, ready to land a nasty kick. She was angry that the youngsters had stolen her liquor. She reminded Rose that she had told her not to bring them any. Rose begged her to stop, afraid she would beat the girl to death. Lena grabbed the old hag's shoulder, trying to take all the blame. But the old woman just kept hitting, regardless of her being only 10 years old. She raised her hand again, and that's when Rose yelled that she would pay for the liquor. Full of hatred, she pulled the silver hairpin from her hair. The girl threw it at the old woman's feet, just to get her to leave the child alone. The woman just looked down on her as if she were trash. Her gaze locked onto Rose's hateful eyes. Without a word, she bent down and picked up the silver thing. The old woman sneered, asking if it was a gift from a John. She left, saying there would be no dinner for Violet tonight. The girl froze, feeling blood drip from her lip. It hurt like hell, but she didn't say a word. The women wiped her down, noticing her body was burning up. She tried to get up to make dinner, but her body fell back into sleep. A snow-white girl stood before her, saying the time has come. She didn't understand why this girl wanted her to wake up. The girl was practically begging her to wake up quickly. Violet couldn't understand why her plea was so sad. She started to cry, realizing there was nothing she could do. It was only then that she woke up to the sound of Lena's scream. She barely managed to open her eyes and found a girl. This girl was wearing a cloak and almost ordering her to wake up. Violet struggled to sit up, completely clueless as to what was happening. Rose burst into the room, yelling that the thugs had arrived. Violet's body was on fire, but they had no choice but to run. The girl's heart was pounding as if it would burst out her chest. Rose grabbed her hand tightly, saying they had no time for tears. It wasn't until she saw the raging fire that she understood what was happening. Their entire village was being burned to the ground, all thanks to the invaders. Their home trembled with the screams of the unfortunate residents. Violet watched as families tried to flee, only to be cut down. The thugs were eliminating the poor villagers one by one. She didn't know what to do, but adrenaline surged through her. They rushed forward, feeling the whole house fill with smoke and ash. Lydia went to the emergency exit, threw open the door, and yelled to run. They bolted forward before they completely choked to death. Rose yelled at Lydia for not leaving and waiting for them. The girl just blinked, saying she couldn't leave them behind. They rushed out of the house just as the beams began to collapse. It seemed every roof was engulfed in flames, with no hope of being saved. Frisia was a nervous wreck, chewing her fingers as she waited for the others. She finally perked up when she saw the girls coming toward her. "Why the hell did you come back for this kid?" She asked them, completely baffled. They knew it could have cost them their lives, but they couldn't just leave the girl behind. The girl remembered Will's words, declaring they'd be safe in the woods. Over that mountain, they listened to Frisia and headed straight for the depths of the gloomy forest. The girls pulled down their hoods, enjoying the feel of the fresh air. Lydia happily thought about how they were finally going to be free. Frisia said there was a town over the mountain, ruled by a noble who had sworn an oath to the king's sword. They continued on, excitedly talking about what they would do next. They were just thrilled to finally be free from that hellhole. Violet glanced at Rose, who was holding her hand. Her gentle smile gave her hope for a brighter future. A few minutes later, Rose froze, feeling something was wrong. Her steps came to a halt, and she began to listen very carefully. She raised a hand, ordering everyone to shut up and stay put. Her intuition was right, as they saw bright flames ahead. They didn't realize they were facing soldiers, the messengers of death. All the girls froze in place, listening to the footsteps. The next second, an army appeared before them. Violet clung to Rose's cloak, stiff with fear at the sight of the armor. The girl told her to calm down, thinking they were guards who had come to deal with the bandits. Frisia's face lit up when she saw her client, Will. She ran to him, ready to embrace him tightly. She wrapped her arms around him, saying she would come find him as soon as she got to town. The girl was practically glowing, calling him her knight in shining armor. That was the one and only time she saw disgust in his eyes. The girls noticed the knight's strange expression. Their premonition was spot on when the guy drew his sword. In an instant, he pierced Frisia in one clean, ruthless motion. It was a fatal blow, as the blood clearly showed. Rose's jaw dropped as shock and raw fear hit her like a tidal wave. They couldn't believe the royal guards were the thugs who did this. The girls just stared at their sister's lifeless body, frozen in place. 10-year-old Violet was paralyzed with fear for her life. She remembered how happily Frisia had talked about Will. She was laughing just a second ago, and now all their hopes were shattered. They vanished as if they had never existed. Only the menacing glint of Sir Will's sword remained. He mentioned that Marquis Ermengarde had ordered the annihilation of all bandits. That's when they knew they wouldn't get out of here alive. Rose grabbed Violet's hand and ran for their lives. They dashed into the dense woods, praying they could escape them. The knights immediately gave chase to the fleeing girls. Violet ran, glancing back from time to time. Then, in an instant, an iron arrow pierced their sister, Lydia. Her life was taken before she could even utter a word. She fell to the ground, scaring Violet out of her wits. The girl screamed her name, tears welling up in her eyes. Lydia's bloody body lay on the ground as she tried to beg for help. Another flower was trampled just like that. The remaining girls fled without looking back. They couldn't understand why they had to pay for something they didn't do. What little hope they had left was crushed when they were surrounded. Lena froze, shielding the others with her own body. Violet trembled in fear, as if this was her end. For some reason, the knights all froze when they saw the color of her eyes. Sir Will berated them for stopping. The other knights didn't dare defy the order and moved forward. Rose tried to explain that they had nothing to do with the bandits. Yet the knights kept closing in. They screamed when they saw the huge mace coming at them. The girls shielded Violet with their bodies, trying to save her. The next second, they were utterly destroyed. Violet watched them fall lifelessly to the ground. She didn't even realize who it was that had held her in that final embrace. Her vision was so blurry, she couldn't even make out their faces. The knight walked forward as if he wanted to save her for last. The girl trembled even more. She stared into his eyes, sure that she was next. But something was telling her to wake up. The sound of cracking bones echoed, and I swear I thought she was a goner. She looked up at the knight, surprised that she felt no pain. Then, with a thud, his bloody body fell heavily to the ground. Even Sir Will couldn't hide his shock. Violet was completely lost, not understanding why everyone was staring at her like that. Will somehow snapped out of his trance and jumped off his horse. He walked straight up to the girl and knelt before her on one knee. Violet thought she was a goner, but things took a complete turn. Everyone started calling her the Saintess and fell to their knees. The stunned girl didn't even notice that she was changing right before their eyes. The next morning, Agricia Castle was in chaos. Representatives from various religious groups were caught off guard by her appearance. One man had to double-check exactly where she had appeared. Marquis Ermengarde just looked at the others without a word. They were angry because her arrival meant the Pope's faction might regain power. It had been 120 years since the last Saintess appeared. The men were shocked that she was just a filthy commoner. Many of them thought the whole thing was just a legend. They realized that if she was real, it meant Malum was real too. King Agridia slammed his fist on the table, telling them all to shut up. He couldn't believe she had appeared in his lifetime. His eyes darted around, thinking that even the gods had abandoned him. Every few decades, the Saintess and Malum would clash. 120 years ago, the Saintess Anastasia disappeared after her victory. She prophesied that evil would not give up, but neither would God. The king believed this prophecy was about the current events. One of the men said that the Saintess's influence would surpass the Pope's. The Marquis replied that for now, she was just a little girl. This meant that everything could change as she grew up. If the Pope got his hands on her, she would become his puppet. After his reply, the man awkwardly apologized for what he had said. Another man chimed in that the people from the temple would arrive soon. They needed to come up with a plan before then. The Marquis glanced at King Triton, the wise one. For years, he had been trying to wash away the shame of the previous king. The old king was defeated and lost his throne. The Marquis wondered if the gods had truly turned their backs on him. Triton just continued to rack his brain over the situation. The Marquis said confidently that he knew a way to get them all out of this. Meanwhile, the girl was reliving those past events over and over. She remembered her mom sacrificing herself, begging her to run. The girl watched as the thugs murdered her right in front of her. Her father tried to protect her mom, but it was all in vain. They were surrounded by these horrible, snarling faces. Violet froze, tears streaming down her cheeks as she watched this hellish scene unfold. Her mother's twisted hands reached for her, begging for help. The girl wept, burned by her own helplessness. Her mother kept screaming her name, desperate to save her. She looked up and saw an evil figure loomed over her. It all turned out to be a nightmare that had plagued her for years. She shot up in bed, not even taking a second to check her surroundings. Violet tried to calm down and figure out what was going on. It was only then that the events of last night began to flood her mind. Her mind went blank at the thought of her dead sisters. She clamped her mouth shut, feeling a wave of nausea rise in her throat. Violet squeezed her eyes shut, realizing this was no damn dream. A sharp headache brought her back to her senses, and she saw the window frames. They were not the same as the ones in her old hiding place. The girl froze, trying to figure out where she was. She clutched the bed sheets, as if everything around her was just an illusion. Violet jumped at the sound of a maid's voice. As she walked in, the girl brought her a glass of water and asked how she was feeling. Violet gathered her thoughts and asked where she was. The handmaiden replied that this was the residence of Marquis Ermengarde, and she immediately realized he must be a nobleman of high standing. Shaking all over, she tried to recall where she had heard that name before. The handmaiden asked her what was wrong. When she heard herself being called the Saintess, the girl flinched, thinking the Saintess was in the room. Not realizing they were talking about her, she asked in surprise who the handmaiden was speaking to. When the handmaiden said she was speaking to her, a chill ran down her spine. She snatched her small hand back, saying, "Impossible, that's not me." Violet kept saying she wasn't the Saintess and that they had the wrong person. She began to tremble, pleading with them to have mercy and believe she wasn't lying. The handmaiden told her not to speak like that, or else God would be angry. The girl burst into tears, thinking there must have been a mistake somewhere. The handmaiden gently took her hand and told her to listen carefully. She led the girl to a mirror and made her look at her reflection. The next moment, Violet saw a completely unfamiliar girl. Looking at the hair that was once light brown, her hands trembled uncontrollably. She couldn't understand why even the color of her eyes had changed. She reached out, tremblingly touching her own reflection. Violet thought back to how she used to look, as if she couldn't believe this was really her. The handmaiden pushed aside her bangs, revealing the stigma. It was proof that God had chosen her to be the Saintess. For all these years, she had thought God had abandoned her soul. She began to rub the mark on her forehead forcefully, as if to reject it all. Violet broke down crying, convinced that the person in the mirror was not her. All the information came crashing down on her like an avalanche. She collapsed to the floor, sobbing in terror at everything that had happened. Another handmaiden told them to hurry and dress the Saintess. She added that the king himself had ordered her to be escorted to the palace that very day. At that moment in the royal palace, another heated debate was taking place. The representatives of the temple were furious at his unilateral decision. The Marquis countered that the Saintess originally came from his territory. He firmly believed that because of this, his family had an obligation to raise her well. Another person protested that this was utter nonsense. He practically spat that the Marquis would pay for this. The king simply watched the confrontation, lost in thought. He fell into deep thought, knowing that a real battle for the Saintess was about to begin. A few hours earlier, the Marquis had presented him with his decision. The king listened to his proposal, tapping his fingers on the table in contemplation. The man had dared to propose adopting the Saintess into his family. Everyone was stunned by this bold move that favored the Marquis himself. The man saw the mixed reactions around him. After all these years, St. Albal was the only place that still remembered the Saintess's existence. In that territory, the Pope's power was even greater than the king's. The nobles who sided with the Pope's faction had invested a great deal of money in the church, which meant the Saintess's appearance would only make the Pope's influence greater. That was precisely why they needed to win her over to their side first. He pointed out that all previous Saintesses had been nobles and had never needed to learn etiquette. This time, however, the Saintess was just a commoner with no formal education. He strongly advocated for her to be raised in a noble family. The Marquis added that they should have insisted on her living in his territory. The king agreed, and the Pope's faction would be unable to object. An advisor suggested the plan was too risky. The king simply asked if he had a better suggestion. The man immediately started coughing, completely unable to think of anything. Afterward, the king grimly concluded that there was no other way. All they could do was hope the Saintess would accept their offered hand. Meanwhile, Violet was stepping out of the carriage. She had managed to pull herself together and had agreed to the trip. The girl looked ahead in amazement, seeing a ridiculously luxurious palace. It was adorned with precious metals, making it sparkle. The girl felt a wave of nervousness. Not long before going inside, she had been wailing in the carriage. Her handmaiden had been doing her best to comfort the heartbroken little girl. She was bewildered by everything that had just happened. She had woken up from a terrible nightmare to find everything turned upside down. Even her eyes, the origin of her name, now shone a bright blue. She clutched her dress, scared to death, not knowing if she would even survive. Violet suddenly realized she didn't even have a place to go back to. The thought hit her even harder, as if her entire life was doomed. The handmaiden genuinely felt sorry for the little girl. She tried to comfort her, telling her everything would be all right. She stroked the girl's hair, saying she was the most important person in the country. Before the audience, the handmaiden did everything she could to calm the girl down. Then she smiled gently and introduced herself as Finn. The girl looked up at her and found her strikingly similar to her own mother. This probably made her trust her handmaiden at least a little. A moment later, she found herself in front of a magnificent palace. Finn announced her arrival at the royal palace and wished her luck. She nervously surveyed the interior, not knowing what would happen next. Violet was no longer crying, but her soul felt empty. Unfortunately, Finn couldn't accompany her into the royal palace. If she were by her side, she wouldn't be so scared. Even though Finn was a stranger, she was the only person she trusted. Finally, they stood before the massive doors. Hearing a commotion from behind the doors, the girl froze. A guard roughly grabbed the girl's arm and squeezed. He gave her a look of disgust and told her to go in. Violet couldn't resist and could only prepare for the worst. The moment she stepped inside, she walked into a heated argument. When the Saintess's arrival was announced, all three parties froze. Violet walked forward slowly, feeling the weight of dozens of gazes. She didn't understand why everyone had suddenly fallen silent. The girl quickly looked around and saw rows of stern glares. She felt very uncomfortable being stared at so openly by everyone. Countless questions popped into her head, wondering why she was here. She was too scared to even lift her head. The king smiled contemptuously, looking down at the weak Saintess. They made her kneel before the king. A representative from the temple immediately interjected, saying the Saintess did not need to kneel to the king. All the commotion made the girl shut her eyes in fear. She just collapsed to the floor like a slave. Until the very end, Violet felt there must have been a mistake. She was afraid they would beat her even harder than Grandma Goat did. The girl was completely at a loss, especially when the king ordered her to raise her head. The man slowly rose from his throne. Seeing him approach, the girl trembled even more. "Get up!" The king's voice was loud enough to shake the entire room. Violet shot to her feet as if her life depended on it. She tried to be quick, but in her clumsiness, she tripped on the hem of her dress. With a thud, she fell flat on her face, which naturally annoyed everyone. They immediately began to whisper that she was such an uncultured commoner. Violet squeezed her eyes shut, wishing for the shameful moment to end quickly. The next moment, she found herself surrounded by another group of people. The temple officials swarmed over and helped her up. She blinked in surprise, looking at the priests around her. Then she saw a familiar face in the crowd, a priest she knew. She recognized him as the priest who had tormented Lydia. He had beaten an innocent girl just to vent all his anger. He, who was once so aggressive and arrogant, was now ready to kneel and beg at her feet. They surrounded her from all sides, including even the high priest of Dublin. The king suggested that the Saintess should make her own choice. Considering how badly the temple needed a Saintess, the high priest objected. The king turned to the Marquis, telling him to propose something. He stepped forward and greeted the messenger of God. He knelt on one knee, adding that it was a great honor to meet her. His name was Marquis Ermengarde, a powerful and influential marquis in the kingdom. The name was the same one she had heard earlier. After waking up, the king laid down the rule that she would decide where she would stay. She had to choose between the temple and Marquis Bjorn's territory. Violet was not ready for this kind of pressure. They were asking her to choose whether to live in the temple or become the Marquis's adopted daughter. A priest tried to choose for her, saying she must stay at the temple. The king immediately silenced him, calling him insolent. He questioned how the priest dared to interrupt the king. He turned back to Violet and said that no one would question her decision. Living with the Marquis, she could slowly learn about the world. Once she stepped into the temple, they would brainwash her with the basic doctrines of divine authority and obedience. The girl was overwhelmed by being asked to answer such a momentous question so quickly. In just one day, she had discovered she was the Saintess and was now standing before the king. Not knowing if her choice was right, she decided to trust her instincts. In the end, the Saintess pointed her finger at Marquis Ermengarde. She didn't want to be with people like that bastard. The king didn't show it, but he was thrilled that everything was going according to plan. The priest was in denial until the very end, saying she was wrong. The Marquis said that since he had hurt her, he must pay for his crime. He remembered the priest questioning how he would take responsibility for all this. The Marquis stood up, protectively shielding the one who had chosen him. He strode toward the man, saying that was his final answer. The priest's face turned blue with anger, but he could hardly retort. They just glared daggers at each other. The king thought that even if this card wasn't an ace, he should still take it. But he wasn't sure if they could play the Saintess as a card. The thought occupied his mind, considering all the risks involved. The Marquis knew that from now on, they would face a grim battle. he noticed that Duke Taijernin had not yet arrived from the Papal State. He would likely use any dirty trick to snatch the Saintess for himself. He would likely not even hesitate to use force. That was precisely why they needed to leave quickly. Before he showed up, with that thought, he extended his hand to the girl, suggesting they leave. She hesitantly touched the hand of the man who was now her guardian. The priest started screaming again, saying he couldn't just take the Saintess away. The Marquis simply replied that it was the Saintess's own decision. He closed in on him, asking if he really intended to obstruct the Saintess's will. The man yielded, shut his mouth, and let them leave the hall. Other servants sadly called out her name. Once in the carriage, the girl noticed Finn wasn't with her. Violet fidgeted, as if danger awaited her. She hated the feeling of the Marquis's gaze constantly on her. She immediately began to wonder if she had messed something up again. Violet shut her eyes and lowered her head, stiff with fear. The Marquis thanked her for the hardship she endured coming all the way to the capital. Then, he added, as if to himself, that there were no women in his house. This confused her, as she had clearly seen many handmaidens. The man clarified that, aside from servants, there were no women in his family. The girl clenched her fists, not understanding why he would bring that up. She trembled nonstop under his sharp gaze. After a short pause, he promised to ensure she would want for nothing. Violet looked at the man again, doubting if she could trust him. She had never seen a Marquis as wealthy as this before. She didn't know if she dared to hope to be the Saintess. Violet thought of her origins, wondering when the Marquis's kindness would run out. There was nothing she could do about it, but accept her fate. She silently followed behind Marquis Bjorn. The moment she saw her favorite handmaiden, the girl felt a wave of relief. She walked straight to the woman, as if she were the only one she could trust. The Marquis immediately exchanged a meaningful look with the butler. The man told Finn that she would now serve the Saintess. The handmaiden smiled at the girl, saying she would be here to help her. The Saintess breathed a sigh of relief, as everyone else frightened her. It was the first time she had genuinely smiled since her arrival. Seeing his new daughter smile like that, the Marquis felt a surge of joy. Finn asked if he should introduce her to the young masters. The man replied coldly that the introductions could wait until morning. Violet was surprised to see he was already preparing to leave. As the Saintess was being reprimanded for something, the man turned around. That sentence echoed throughout the palace that night. The girl froze on the spot like a scolded kitten. Her heart began to pound, thinking she had done something wrong again. She had only wanted to bid the Marquis good night before bed, but they stopped her. It seemed her adoptive father had seen right through her with just a glance. He knelt down and told her that in this country, she was the most important person, alongside the king and the pope. The Marquis added that she should not bow her head to anyone. The girl agreed with him, but still asked if he was her father now. The sweet and innocent question made the Marquis's heart skip a beat. Violet asked sadly if she couldn't say good night to her own father. He was deeply moved by her reaching out to him like this. He wished her a good night in return and reached out to pat her head. He stopped when he saw her flinch in terror. The Marquis left the room without another word, lost in his own thoughts. Both Finn and the Saintess could see he had become preoccupied. Marquis Ermengarde leaned against a wall, mulling everything over in his mind. It wasn't easy for him to accept that God's messenger was now his daughter. The next morning, Finn greeted the Saintess as usual. She noted with concern that the girl's eyes were swollen. Finn began to comfort the girl who had cried all night. It seemed Violet had succumbed to the melancholy of the night and sorrow. She couldn't sleep, with countless thoughts swirling in her head. Violet didn't know how long she would live, or if she too would be eliminated. The constant worry kept giving her new reasons to cry. Finn talked about her incredible power as she combed her hair. Her body, once covered in bruises and scars, was now completely clear. The handmaiden smiled, guessing that was the power of the Saintess. The girl herself seemed to realize for the first time that there was no more pain in her body. Finn asked if she was ready to meet the young masters. The Saintess froze, feeling a new wave of anxiety wash over her. All the nobles in the Flower District had been arrogant and cruel. That was exactly why she was so worried about how she would be treated. She knew she couldn't escape her fate, but it still scared her. Finn hurried her along, suddenly hinting that they might be late. She finally left the room, clutching her dress until the very last moment. A few minutes later, she met the Marquis' very different sons for the first time. The third son, Adrian, rudely said her hair color reminded him of a ghost. Just as she arrived, the Marquis came and ordered everyone to greet her formally. He shot a stern glare at his mischievous sons. Adrian was about to argue after learning she was the Saintess. Only Daniel chided him for speaking without thinking and politely introduced himself to her. He smiled and introduced himself as the second son of Marquis Ermengarde. The Saintess blushed, a little overwhelmed at seeing such a handsome man for the first time. She froze when they told her she had to permit him to rise. The girl looked away awkwardly and said he could get up. Adrian immediately rushed over, asking if she was too stupid to understand. He had no intention of kneeling before his little sister. The Marquis' glare was enough to shut him up. He couldn't believe he had to wag his tail for a commoner. Violet knew he had a point, as such a thing was normally unthinkable. Hearing his father's icy voice, Adrian immediately shut his mouth. The man was furious at how foolish his son was being. Adrian quickly hid behind his older brother, Daniel. The Marquis tried to control his anger and sighed wearily. He told Finn to lead the Saintess to her place. Finn immediately guided the Saintess to her seat at the dining table. Adrian was still annoyed that they would have to see her all the time from now on. He kept staring daggers at the little Saintess's back. Even while sitting at the table, he wanted to make her feel uneasy. She kept worrying if she had done something wrong again. Finally, her jaw dropped when she saw the ridiculously lavish spread on the table. She had never seen such delicious-looking food. Years of starvation had certainly left their mark on the child. The Marquis noticed that his eldest son, Esmond, was absent. It angered him to hear that he had already left the castle. The girl had just noticed the empty seat beside her. She was surprised that the family had so many heirs. As soon as everyone started eating, she completely froze. The Saintess felt a wave of shame, as she had no idea how to eat any of this. It seemed Adrian enjoyed this chance to tease the girl. He looked at her as if he had just discovered her darkest secret. The boy called her a fool for not even knowing how to eat. He blinked in agreement, knowing she had probably never seen food like this. The boy was surprised to see how much his words hurt her. Daniel, sitting next to them, cut a piece of meat and told him to shut up. He added that Adrian's table manners weren't much better, so he should keep quiet. Meanwhile, Finn handed the girl a knife for her to use. The Marquis closely observed the learning process. He suddenly announced that they should get some etiquette lessons. The Saintess looked in shame at the man who had taken her in. He just closed his eyes and continued cutting his food. After a short pause, she agreed to his request for her to be trained. She had no idea that just eating could be so difficult. The Saintess closed her eyes in confusion, a sudden weight in her stomach. Finn noticed the second son, Daniel, approaching. He tried to support the girl, telling her that Adrian was always like that. She looked at the man in surprise, unable to believe he was taking her side. The man told her not to worry and to believe that things would get better. He was comforting her on one hand, but on the other, he was also pointing out just how bad her etiquette was. The Saintess wasn't sure if she could really do it. It seemed Daniel noticed how much she had changed. The girl ran away as fast as her legs could carry her. The handmaidens chased after her and found her throwing up all over the floor. Finn watched the scene, filled with a mix of pity and disgust. Her eyes couldn't leave the Saintess, who was bent over and vomiting. Finn went to the child, stroking her hair and asking if she was okay. Violet didn't know what she would do if she threw up every time she ate. She didn't know why she was having these eating problems. Finn stood up and told her she should take a bath to relax. She also learned that she had a meeting with the king today. The Saintess, embarrassed by all the attention, said she could wash herself. They told her it was the handmaiden's job, but she wouldn't budge. The girl lowered her head in shame and waited for them to leave. Meanwhile, Marquis Ermengarde was already waiting for her downstairs. The butler said with a smile that young ladies always take a long time to get ready to go out. Finally, they saw her coming down the stairs. She was walking with her maid, Finn, wearing a brightly colored dress. The butler immediately commented that it was as if the mansion had been lit up. The Marquis, in turn, playfully asked if there had ever been a time of darkness here. He didn't wait for her to reach the bottom of the stairs before urging her to leave. Violet felt anxious about having to meet the king again. She looked at Finn, as if asking herself if she would mess things up again. The maid simply smiled and wished her a safe journey. Violet glanced at her without a word. She stared at her adoptive father, frozen in place, a flicker of hope igniting in her heart. She truly believed and hoped that nothing bad would happen today. After a while, they arrived at the king's audience hall. They stood stiffly at the entrance, waiting for permission to enter. The Marquis said that she must be especially careful at the monarch's receptions or when speaking with members of the royal family. He also added that if she saw any priests, she should run. The Marquis stated grimly that they were always looking for an opportunity to snatch her away. That was precisely why she had to flee immediately if she was left alone. She agreed, as it was those same priests who had beaten her sisters. Violet swore to herself that she would never leave. The Marquis closed his eyes and let out a thoughtful breath. A few minutes later, they arrived at King Agridia's office. The girl could barely squeeze out a word. When the king asked for her name, her palms began to tremble. When he pointed out that her name was even a type of flower, he asked the Marquis if he was aware of this, but he received a negative answer. The king was surprised that he didn't even know his own adopted daughter's name. He glanced at the girl and could see how much she wanted to leave. They discussed teaching her etiquette first and then having a theologian tutor her. Meanwhile, the girl was scared to death, terrified that she would mess things up. She was completely caught off guard when the Marquis suggested she learn fencing. The king agreed with him, although he seemed somewhat surprised by it. The Marquis believed she needed some force to deal with Malcolm. Their words threw the already insecure girl into complete confusion. She had never studied before, and now she had to tackle so many different subjects at once. The king noticed her state and suggested she needed a break. Violet immediately perked up, not wanting to show her exhaustion. But despite her efforts to act fine, the Marquis agreed. Violet was thinking about how she had messed up again. A few minutes later, she found herself by a beautiful fountain, trying to relax. The child was stunned by the peculiar shapes formed by the water's flow. She took a good look around, feeling as if she were in some kind of paradise. She was completely captivated, listening motionless to the sound of the water. She was stunned when a beautiful little bird landed in her hand. The Saintess immediately smiled at the bird, as if she could hear its heart. A servant noticed that when she smiled, she looked like a completely different person. Violet admitted frankly that she was happy the bird had come to her. The man was stunned and asked if she could understand what it was saying. The girl smiled, saying it felt wonderful that someone could understand her. Her companion was impressed by the Saintess's ability. For the first time, he felt that divine power in the air. He believed she was blessed by the God who created all things. The girl found it hard to see herself that way and expressed her doubts. Both of them turned when that detestable priest came running toward them. The moment she recognized the bastard, the bird flew from her hand. He immediately knelt before her, calling himself a servant of God. The priest roughly grabbed her arm and pulled her toward him. He started saying again that it wasn't too late to go to the temple. The priest stared at her like a madman, which made her skin crawl. The man guarding her snapped at him, asking what on earth he was doing. The bastard protested that a mere servant must respect the clergy. He began to threaten him with God's wrath and paying for his sins. Violet stared intently at his face like a hawk. It was so similar to how he looked the day he beat her sister. To break free, she bit his hand with all her might. They tried to stop her, but she fled as fast as she could. She was terrified the priest would chase after and catch her. After hearing her guardian's words, she felt they might lock her up in the temple and then abuse her. She suddenly saw a bird in the sky and followed it involuntarily. Long story short, the bird disappeared and she got completely lost in the palace. She didn't know where she was, but she knew she had to go back. Violet remained frozen in place until someone grabbed her hand. She was terrified once again when she saw her hand being tightly gripped and pulled. Fearing it was another person from the temple, she began to scream. Not wanting to be locked in that temple again, she bit the person's sleeve. He didn't even flinch when bitten, simply telling her to calm down. The girl stopped, realizing it wasn't the priest's voice. She finally looked up and saw a young man standing there. To her surprise, he looked very much like her guardian, the Marquis. His eyes were like the sea, and his clothes were embroidered with gold thread. She suddenly remembered Rose mentioning a prince in the castle. The child had a realization. My goodness, what she said was actually true. She kept staring at him until he reached out and took her hand. She was suddenly startled and realized, oh no, what have I done? Violet fell to her knees, begging the prince for forgiveness. She was afraid her actions would cause big trouble for the Marquis. After her repeated apologies, he asked if she really thought he was the prince. The girl was stunned, completely unaware of how wrong she was. When he reached out to her, she flinched in fear, thinking he was going to hit her, but he just crouched down beside her. She looked into his blue eyes again, feeling the warmth of his palm. Then, in one fluid motion, he pulled her up to stand beside him. She froze when he said they needed to leave and that her father was looking for her. Finally, he introduced himself as the eldest son, Esmond Ermengarde. Violet was so embarrassed she wanted to find a hole to crawl into. He also added that Prince Charles had just turned 5 this year. Esmond warned her to be more careful with her words. He added in a terrifying tone that if he hadn't been the one to find her, their entire family could have been executed. Violet froze completely at the thought of the possible consequences of her mistake. Could her blunder really bring down the whole family? Unbelievable. She still held Esmond's hand tightly, following him quietly. Despite his cold words, she was surprised to find his hand had been warm the whole time. Back at the palace, Finn felt something was off with the Saintess. She asked if the Marquis had really been furious because of her yesterday. The girl was surprised by her question, wondering if she wasn't supposed to be punished yesterday. They had actually praised her for shaking off the priest. The Marquis was just shocked that she had returned with Esmond. She didn't know why, but it was written all over his face. Finn just said that she would be getting a tutor starting today. It was said to be Viscountess Candor, a high society lady. Finn finished getting her ready and styled her hair in an exquisite braid. She said the Viscountess would arrive in the afternoon and told her to have some breakfast first. Violet was dejected, afraid she would mess up again. She froze at the entrance to the hall, not wanting to go in at all. The girl took a deep breath and forced herself to join them. She was surprised to see Esmond was also at breakfast this morning. A maid carefully arranged for her to sit next to the young master. Violet still felt embarrassed about what happened yesterday. She froze when a plate of dessert was placed in front of her. She was shocked by how soft and shiny the bread looked, but still didn't know how to use the cutlery. She just grabbed the bread and began to chew on it in big bites. She was used to eating stale bread, but this thing was simply incredible. The Marquis watched her enjoy it with rapt attention, seemingly not caring at all how she ate. Unlike her, Adrian didn't like the taste of the sweet roll. He immediately shut his mouth when he saw the Marquis give him a death glare. Only then did he notice the way Violet was eating. He yelled that she should use a knife and called her an idiot. He called her cream-covered face disgusting and said he'd rather be blind. Violet was terrified and didn't know what she should do first. Instantly, the pleasant atmosphere became suffocating and the food became hard to swallow. Finn sensed her distress and wiped her messy mouth. Daniel stood up for her, reminding them she hadn't even started her training yet. Adrian asked irritably when her skills would ever improve. He was angry that he had to watch that ghastly sight at every meal. All these insults made Violet feel sick again. She couldn't let them see and try to leave. She accidentally bumped a plate with a half-eaten piece of bread, and the plate fell on the table. When the plate shattered, Violet panicked even more. Now she was absolutely sure she would be punished and beaten. She started picking up the broken porcelain pieces herself while apologizing. Everyone tried to stop her, but she was too scared to listen to anything. She was trying to make up for her mistake, but then someone grabbed her hand. Esmond calmly repeated that she needed to stop what she was doing. The girl looked at him as if she had seen a ghost. Her brother pointed to her wound and said she was bleeding. Finn rushed to the girl's side and was shocked to see the wound. She suggested they hurry back to the room while the family was still stunned. Esmond was the only one who looked at her with a cold, composed gaze. On the way back to the room, Finn asked her about the broken plate. Seeing the girl was unwell, she opened the door to the room. Violet didn't answer, simply collapsing to the floor as another wave of nausea hit her. She couldn't figure out why she always ran into the same damn problems. She said she never wanted to eat again, not realizing the Marquis was watching in secret. Violet said she was always stressed from the fear of messing up. Finn gently hugged the girl, telling her everything would be all right. The girl started to cry, not understanding why she always showed only her worst side. She froze when Finn announced the master's arrival. The Saintess froze, realizing he had witnessed the whole thing. His face was grim, and he couldn't say a word. His gaze met the Saintess's tense expression. He also saw the pool of vomit she had left behind her. The man said that if this was too hard for her, she could eat alone. The Saintess just nodded guiltily and lowered her eyes. After that, the Marquis practically fled the room. Although she had wished for it too, the thought that they never wanted to see her again still hurt. That very day, the girl was scheduled for her first lesson. Adela Iskander politely greeted the messenger of God. Violet immediately noticed her elegance. Adela said she was already on one knee, waiting for a response. The girl was so nervous, she even forgot what she was supposed to say. The woman explained that no one would rise until she gave the order. She asked if Violet had made the Marquis and others break etiquette before as well. Violet tried to apologize, but Adela called it an act of willfulness. She added that the Saintess should not let her humble origins be a weakness. She demanded that Violet straighten her back and adopt a confident posture. Adela was harshly critical of the Saintess's every little detail. She even reprimanded the girl for not healing her own wound. Violet was about to ask again when the woman cut her off. She repeated her question, asking why Violet hadn't used her healing powers. The girl froze when Adela asked if she was trying to get attention this way. The woman's tone sounded disappointed when she heard Violet didn't know how to heal. Finally, they began the lesson, and Violet felt completely useless. Adela trained the girl rigorously for hours until sunset. Violet desperately forced herself to try and heal. She began to doubt if she was even the Saintess, until Finn reminded her it was time for a snack. The maid smiled as she watched the little child. The girl devoured the dessert and asked if she could eat with everyone once she learned proper etiquette. When she heard a positive answer, she said there was still so much to learn. She worried that after learning it all, she wouldn't be herself anymore. She had stepped into another world, and now she had to become another person. She was once a commoner, but now she was at the top of the food chain. Her only worry now was whether she could still be herself at the end of this journey. Finn suddenly told her she shouldn't talk about such things. The Saintess gazed thoughtfully at her maid. She was scared of the way people's eyes were blank when they spoke to her. For a few days, she lived quietly, as if she didn't exist. From then on, she ate alone and practiced when the Viscountess came. She would also take Finn for walks whenever she felt suffocated in her room. Lately, the Viscountess had been constantly applying pressure after discovering she was illiterate. The girl glanced at a butterfly, wondering if she was really making any progress. Adrian suddenly asked if she was intentionally not healing her hand. Violet was startled, not having noticed when he appeared at all. Adrian grabbed her hand and asked her how much it hurt. He found it strange that a wound from glass hadn't healed after several days. He looked down at her, surprised to see she was just a child. He had thought that coming from the bottom, she would be different from them, but she wasn't. The boy asked why she wasn't eating with him anymore. He kept asking questions, but she just remained silent. He was about to leave, put off by her silence. When Daniel appeared behind him, Adrian froze like a cat caught in the act. Fearing a scolding, he immediately hid behind Saintess Violet. Daniel sighed, as if in defeat, then greeted the representative of God. She told him he didn't have to kneel for her. Daniel was surprised, but gave her a gentle smile. He apologized for having to step away for a moment. He went up to Adrian and said he had put a bunch of centipedes on his clothes. Daniel asked in a terrifying tone if he really wanted to become the youngest patricide in history. Adrian immediately started making excuses, saying it wasn't what it looked like. Daniel just told him to get back to his damn homework. As soon as he finished scolding his younger brother, the boy bolted back to the palace. Violet was surprised when he said she was actually changing. He guessed she didn't like him calling her by her first name and was a bit dejected, but she reassured him. He laughed when she called him young Master Daniel. Daniel said she was his little sister now and asked if she was still going to call him young master. She became flustered when he added that he should be calling her Mississippi. He liked her reaction and added that they shouldn't use titles at all. He also suggested she call him brother, or just Daniel. She was overwhelmed by how kind he was to someone of her background. He gently stroked his sister's hair, creating a magical moment. Seeing him smile so warmly and openly was a new experience for her. She froze when he asked if all of this was too hard for her. She couldn't answer until tears started to stream down her cheeks. Daniel immediately apologized, saying he didn't mean to make her cry. He stroked her hair again, saying he should have come sooner. His gentleness only made her cry harder, as if it were melting her soul. All her pent-up emotions seemed to melt away when he asked her how she was doing. For the first time, she felt accepted and decided she wanted to know more about him. Her question made Finn wonder if they had really met. She mentioned that she had met Esmond's brother as well. When Finn asked if he was a good person, she agreed. Finn said that Daniel was the one most like their late mother. He was a top student and had done many things for the country, far beyond what an adult could do. Finn had heard that he used to be very frail before she came to the palace. She sighed, thinking that if it weren't for Daniel, who would look after that troublemaker. The Saintess smiled, thinking about how amazing her brother was. Finn was glad she was finally starting to take an interest in the family's affairs. In truth, Violet had always been interested, but she was too afraid to ask. With these thoughts, the girl began to get ready for bed. Lying in bed, she decided to ask about her eldest brother. For some reason, his cold attitude scared her a little. Finn tucked her in and said he was the one most like the Marquis. The Ermengarde family was famous for training the royal sword. Violet had already heard about this in her lessons with the Viscountess. Esmond was seen as the future heir of the family, and he had to live up to that. This year, he was even admitted to the Royal Knights. It was impressive how much he had achieved at just 15 years old. Saintess Violet was amazed by the man's ambition. His coldness scared her, but she still remembered the warmth of his hands. Gazing out the window, she wondered if he was a good person after all. The next morning, the Marquis appeared at Count Racine's mansion. Count Richel was chattering on about how there cannot be two suns in the sky. The Marquis mulled over the phrase in his mind. He could be referring to the king and the Pope, or the Pope and the Saintess. The Pope held the highest position, and the representative of God could not be his equal. The Saintess was a being that neither the Pope nor the king could greet. Count Richel added that he still couldn't figure out what the Duke was planning. He asked the Marquis if the Pope had ever contacted him in secret. The Marquis denied it, shocked that the temple wasn't even talking to them. The Count backed him up, saying the temple should be begging the Saintess for a deal. Suddenly, he wondered if the Saintess was really useful to His Majesty. Duke Tigernan had sent a telegram saying he was coming here because of the Saintess, but he still hadn't shown up and was hiding his true intentions. It was unclear if this was the Pope's order or if he was acting on his own. The Count understood why the current king hated the temple so much. He was about to say that at this rate, they would end up just like the previous king. The Marquis closed his eyes wearily, realizing his assumptions were correct. He had a feeling this whole thing would continue to play out for a century. Without a Saintess, the church collapsed under the watch of the Pope and the Duke. Over time, people turned away from the church due to corruption, and King Astor saw his chance. Then, the Pope declared the king was becoming more obsessed with Milan, citing natural disasters as proof. Even as a plague ravaged the kingdom, the church did nothing to help. Only after chaos ensued did the Pope finally send priests to help the people. It was said the Duke intended to put his half-brother Tigernan, who was accused of being possessed by a demon, on the throne. The king had only one way out. He was thus completely crushed and deposed by the church. The clergy took back all the power. The Saintess cannot exist apart from the church. That's why the king was sweating bullets. This was what made the Saintess's appearance so risky. Her very existence was a stumbling block to the king's vision of achieving complete faith. They had been dealing with this problem until the Count's daughter appeared. The man immediately started using baby talk on his precious little daughter. The Marquis couldn't believe that a chancellor of a country to be so soft. The Count turned to Sisu, telling her to greet the Marquis. The girl immediately jumped off the sofa and walked towards a man. Sisuela immediately bowed to greet the Marquis, and the man returned the courtesy, patting her on the head. Seeing her smile at his touch, he was reminded of Violet. The little girl ran to her dad, telling him she was starving. She kissed her father when she heard he was going to make her pancake cakes. They asked the Marquis how the Eye of the Storm was doing at his place. He also asked about the cream buns they had sent for the saint. They were all greatly shocked when they found out she had thrown them up. The Marquis sighed wearily, saying her taste was even worse than he had imagined. The Count felt it must be tough for the saint to survive in a place full of men. Sisu said she also wanted to meet the saint, even though she was just a commoner. The girl believed that there was nothing wrong with ordinary people. The Marquis calmly watched the heartwarming conversation between the father and daughter, and so he decided to seek advice from a little girl to win the saint's trust. He asked her what little girls liked the most. On that same day, Violet received a large pile of brightly colored dresses. She was ecstatic, as they had bought all these things just for her. She was very grateful for the Marquis's care and attention, happily agreeing to try on the dresses and receiving endless compliments. Finn was stunned by the young noble lady's beauty. She said she would bring her some tea before the Viscountess's arrival. The saint started staring at her reflection in the mirror, unable to believe it was her. She couldn't understand why the Marquis had decided to buy these things for her. Violet turned around when the strict teacher appeared. The woman curtsied, but her eyes were locked on the lavishly dressed girl. She asked bluntly what on earth she was wearing. Hearing it was bought by the Marquis, Adela tried to guess the price of the dress. She asked her if she knew why he would buy it for her. When the saint said she had to work harder, she agreed. The woman added that she needed to become worthy of the dress. Adela suggested practicing her walking posture again, although they hadn't learned that part yet. The woman sat down on the sofa in frustration, telling her to hurry. Violet tried to imitate what the Viscountess expected of her. The woman bit her lip in annoyance and snapped at the girl. She grabbed a whip, saying she hadn't expected her to be so dull. She pierced the saint with a scrutinizing gaze, judging how slowly she was learning. The girl trembled when she was ordered to lift her skirt. The Viscountess observed every flicker of pain on the girl's face as she whipped her calves again and again. The Viscountess suggested they practice table manners again, tormenting the saint in this way until sunset. She said she would tell the Marquis she had been corporally punished. Finally, she gave the girl a heavy, contemptuous glance. "Does this gorgeous dress look good on me?" she asked. The Viscountess said she was ashamed and told her to hide the scars. The saint nodded, but was berated for even that simple gesture. The girl quickly corrected herself and agreed with her teacher. After the endless torment, she was finally alone. Her calves were covered in gruesome, bloody marks. The girl thought that she had been hit harder today. She told herself it was fine, because the old goat used to hit much harder. She decided to go for a walk to clear her head. Her calves were hurting terribly, but she was wondering if she would run into Daniel. He didn't hit her, he always just said she was improving. The saint was lost in thought until she noticed her unpredictable brother. She tried to slip away, but he spotted her at once. He began to taunt her again, asking if she was wearing clothes that didn't suit her. He flinched in surprise when she said she already knew. She became very frustrated, saying she knew full well that the dress didn't look good on her. With that, she clenched her fists in anger and walked away from her brother. He thought she was utterly boring, then noticed her unusual gait. The girl hurriedly sat down on a bench. Thinking of Daniel, she knew where his room was but felt it would be awkward to go to him. She wanted to go home, as her legs were hurting badly, but she shook the thought away. The girl looked up and saw a male bird. He was preening, boasting about how charming and amazing he was. He courted a female bird flying past, asking her to lay an egg for him. Violet simply watched the bird's mating ritual. Utterly dejected, she couldn't figure out why her ability only worked in odd situations. So she slipped away, deciding to go check out the chapel. Violet was surprised there was such a large chapel here. She thought she'd just take a peek and then return to her room. Ahead was a massive staircase, which only exacerbated the pain in her calves. At first, she was afraid because everything felt so new and strange. Before she knew it, she was standing before a wooden door. She froze when she saw something unfamiliar casting a terrifying gaze at her. Thinking it was a ghost, she fell to the ground in fright. Can you believe it? It turned out to be none other than her brother, standing there. She apologized, still unable to believe she had made such a serious mistake again. He simply walked over to her and asked if she was okay. The girl tried to get up, but her dress made it hard to stand steady. He guessed she had hurt her leg, but she denied it. She worried he would think her a complete fool for being so weak. Esselmont questioned why she couldn't get up. Violet grew flustered, unsure of how best to answer. She never expected him to just lift her skirt and check her legs for himself. The girl tried to cover her scarred legs, feeling utterly ashamed. She saw his sharp gaze, unable to tell if he was angry or something else. He said coldly that he just wanted to check her injuries. The saint was still shocked that he had lifted her skirt so casually. It seemed she had forgotten that he could find out what had happened to her. The man's face darkened when he saw the marks from the Viscountess's training. He froze, while the saint kept trying to cover her face in shame. The moment he mentioned the wounds, she jolted, remembering what she was hiding. She tried to cover it up, but he grabbed her by the ankle. Esselmont asked her why she was suddenly apologizing. The girl just said she went somewhere she wasn't supposed to. She added that she was also sorry for messing up after being taken in. She lowered her head, feeling she had done a terrible job. Esselmont looked away as she kept making excuses. She bit her lip, hurt, when he said the dress didn't suit her yet. He told her to have the maids put it away for later. He also asked why she was wandering around, and she said she wanted to see Daniel. Esselmont just silently picked her up to ease her pain. The girl grew anxious, begging him to put her down. She promised to be good and said she shouldn't be held in his arms like this. He simply replied that there was nothing strange about a brother holding his sister. She knew he was right, but she still felt embarrassed. Esselmont just stated flatly that this was how it was. With that, he carried the girl back to the mansion. Meanwhile, the mansion was in an uproar over the saint's disappearance. The servants bowed their heads in guilt, announcing their arrival. Esselmund was angry and ordered them to call for the saint's personal maid. The girl woke up in surprise when he said he would carry her to her room. The saint immediately sensed the tense atmosphere among the servants. A few minutes later, her brother carried her to her room and placed her on the sofa. Violet obeyed his command, but was still worried about breaking the rules. She sat up straight when the butler brought Finn in. It seemed they could see the bruises on her legs, even from a distance. Finn was too scared to speak when she realized why she had been summoned. The saint froze when her brother asked if their father knew about this. She couldn't believe the problem was her injuries, not her being scolded. Violet didn't understand why, as this was completely normal for her. The butler turned to Esselmont, racking his brain over who could have done this. He questioned Finn, but she said she had no idea what had happened. Her voice trembled as she began to beg for forgiveness. Even Adrian came running because of the noise they were making. He was even more shocked when he saw the wounds on the girl's legs. His older brother threatened to punish him if he ever called the saint by that name again. The boy immediately shut his mouth, terrified of being punished. It seemed Finn's reaction only made the older brother angrier. He harshly reprimanded her for her negligence and incompetence. She began to tremble as he started thinking about what crime to charge her with. The man's glare made her blood run cold. She knew she was in big trouble and tried to defend herself. The saint was just as surprised, as he had always seemed so calm before. However, the moment he got angry, everyone around him immediately tensed up. She trembled, thinking she had never seen anyone so terrifying. Esmond added that there was no way she could have been unaware of all this. He questioned the competence of someone who would make such a grave mistake. Violet wasn't about to let him hurt her maid. She stood up, pleading with him not to punish Finn. She was limping, but she still kept begging for her. Violet tried to persuade him, but he was unmoved. He ordered the butler to pay her 3 times her salary for the period she worked. He cut her off, saying she also deserved severance pay. The girl couldn't believe he had decided to send the innocent Finn away. Esselman said he was acting on his father's behalf and had the same authority. He added that there was nothing she could do about it. Violet suddenly realized he had no intention of listening to her from the start. The miserable cries of the woman, who had been like a mother to her, tore at her soul. She apologized to the innocent maid in her heart. The girl froze when the maid's gaze turned to her. The girl glared at her with raw contempt and hatred, as if blaming her for everything. It was a familiar look, one she never thought she'd see again. It sent a chill down her spine, a pain she knew all too well. Even now, Violet was trying to make excuses for her, thinking she was just angry. The butler approached the maid and ordered her to come with him. Finn stared at him with a look of mingled hope and disgust. It was as if her entire future had been reduced to dust. In her heart, she cursed the saint she had both envied and served. Meanwhile, Violet was desperately trying to think of a way to get her back. She couldn't let Finn leave, and she collapsed to the floor. The next moment, she burst into tears with all her might. Adrian tried to calm her down, but her hysterical crying just wouldn't stop. Violet was ready to resort to extreme measures, willing to do anything to clear Finn's name. Adrian was annoyed because everyone had slipped away, leaving him alone to deal with it. He started to distract the little girl, blowing on her face to try and calm her down. He promised he would try to talk to his dad, just to get her to stop crying. The saint looked at the boy, realizing she had gotten what she wanted. The boy added that everything would be fine once he talked to his father. When he asked her to stop crying, the girl actually stopped. Like a true gentleman, Adrian moved to her side and patted her on the back. The next day, Viscountess Iskander was summoned to the Marquis' office. She denied her misdeeds, but the Marquis said the maid had confessed everything. The Viscountess claimed she was only trying to discipline the girl. She added that the saint had been studying for a long time. She had no other choice. The woman also mentioned the dresses, implying the girl didn't understand their value. The Marquis said she had insulted the saint with such vicious words. She trembled when he threatened that she would lose her position if the Pope or the Duke found out the truth. She understood the risk, but still thought of the saint as a mere legend. It stung her that her illegitimate daughter was neglected because she couldn't afford decent clothes. Jealousy boiled inside her because the saint was treated differently. The Marquis gave her hope, saying he would only ask one question. He made it clear that he would not forget how she had treated his daughter. From now on, her entire family was forbidden from setting foot on any inch of his territory. The Viscountess was terrified. Her husband was not supposed to know about any of this. The moment the Marquis told her to get out, she knew she was finished. She was furious that he had made that commoner girl his daughter in the first place. Her blood ran cold when she saw the terrifying look in his eyes. She had thought he was just a naive and weak man, but he was simply fearsome. The Viscountess realized she was looking at a man worthy of being called the King's Sword. The woman accepted her utter defeat and left. As soon as he was alone, the Marquis immediately started on his duties. He calmly worked through his daily documents. He had to choose a new tutor for the saint again, but he left that matter to the Count. Meanwhile, the saint had just woken up. She was surprised to see an unfamiliar maid standing there. Violet jumped up, asking where Finn was. The young girl just silently shook her head. The gesture made the saint assume that Finn had really been sent away. Seeing tears well up in her eyes, the maid said she believed she would like it here. She introduced herself as and asked Violet not to be so formal with her, and was thrilled by how cute the girl was, but she maintained a straight face. She suddenly asked the girl if she was really that uncomfortable. The girl blurted out that she wanted to get closer to the young lady. She smiled sweetly, saying they would try to become friends. Now Violet was listening, but she still found it hard to trust, and tried everything to cheer her up and win her trust. The girl paused, then asked if the Viscountess would be coming today, and almost called the Viscountess an idiot, and said she wouldn't be coming anymore. Violet was surprised to hear that Countess Raquel herself would now be teaching her. The poor child immediately thought she would be even more terrifying than the Viscountess, and told her not to worry, saying the Countess was very considerate. The maid again asked her not to be so formal, and was thrilled that Violet was actually listening to her. She squeezed her hand and told her everything would be all right. The maid grinned and suggested they go for a walk. Violet was taken aback by her energy, but agreed nonetheless. After a while, they ran into a horrified-looking Adrian. It turned out and was showing her the various rooms of the mansion. The maid playfully teased Adrian for his rude way of speaking. The saint was surprised at and was so outspoken. They continued on their way and somehow ended up in the kitchen, and excitedly showed her where they were cooking up brand new masterpieces. Jack greeted the energetic maid, Anne, with a smile. Seeing the saint shocked him greatly, which completely ignited his passion. The man rushed over to Violet and bowed. She wanted to tell him he didn't have to do that, but he insisted on not getting up. She insisted he stand, after which he decided to show his respect in another way. He offered a small cake he had managed to make. He had spent a long time thinking about what she would like and decided on figs. Violet had certainly eaten figs as they grew everywhere. She quickly tasted the cake and felt pure bliss. Jack and him were thrilled that she liked it all so much. The man promised to make even more desserts, and suggested eating the rest of the cake in her room after the tour. The girl agreed, and they headed towards the dining hall, and I just said she would soon be eating there with everyone. When the saint became terrified, she said she was just a commoner, not a real daughter. The maid became dejected and asked if Adrian had given her a hard time. The girl shook her head, saying she just didn't want to see any of those people. She said she didn't want to see the young master either, which surprised the maid. She knew it wasn't his fault, but she hated the people who had sent Finn away. Violet understood how important those jobs were to commoners. Even so, the young master had cruelly sent the maid away. He had coldly ignored Violet's pleas and Finn's words, and tried to explain that the young master was actually a good person. Violet wanted to believe it, but he was completely different towards her, and couldn't help but wonder what he had done to deserve that awful hairstyle. The saint wondered if and would get in trouble for a conversation like this. The maid took the girl's hand and suggested they go somewhere else. They continued to wander through the mansion, not knowing they would run into the Marquis, and had deliberately wanted to show her where the Marquis's office was. She had grown up with Esselman and was a very reliable maid. The Marquis had thought the saint would stay put, and was in complete control. The man stopped and politely greeted the saint. The girl froze, a storm of conflicting emotions churning inside her. The next second, she was trembling with rage and bolted in that direction, and gave the Marquis a quick bow and then chased after her. The Marquis sighed wearily, thinking the swelling in his foot should have gone down. Just a short while ago, Adrian had been pleading for Finn. He said Violet was sobbing her heart out like a little child. Adrian begged for the maid to be brought back, but the Marquis flatly refused him. These things made him feel as if the girl absolutely hated him. She didn't know that Finn had been bought off by the Viscountess to keep quiet. He knew that even if he told the saint, she would never believe such a claim. The Marquis was gazing out the window when he caught a glimpse of the past. Before his wife died, she said he wouldn't be so strict if they had a daughter. He just smiled, holding an umbrella for her and watching her. All his sons had completely opposite personalities and needed him to be strict. A lovely daughter, he thought, might have made him a more positive person. His wife, who had wanted a daughter so badly, had passed away 5 years ago. He felt that if she were still here, she would have loved Violet as her own. In that moment, the Marquis realized he had completely failed as a parent. He knew he really needed Countess Rizzle's help. Meanwhile, the saint was still desperately running from a maid, and chased her, not even sure if she was driven by anger or pure hurt. The girl thought Finn was fired just because she had been beaten. Finally, tired from running, she stopped to catch her breath, and gently wiped the sweat from her face and asked how she was. Despite her kindness, Violet still saw her as just a replacement, but she was too nice to be angry at. The maid calmly asked her what had made her run off like that. She would never admit that she hated the Marquis. She snapped her head up when she heard a familiar voice in the distance. Standing there was none other than Daniel, looking extremely worried, like an angel compared to everyone else. Without a word, the heartbroken girl fell into his arms. She held him tightly, feeling the warmth of his gentle touch. He turned to and told her he would personally see her back to her room. Daniel apologized to the saint for not knowing about her corporal punishment. She told him it was okay, since she hadn't said anything. The boy asked with concern if she could still walk. He was the only one who could understand her feelings for the maid. She thought he could persuade the Marquis and be of help, but Daniel just shook his head. He had a guilty look on his face, as he knew his father and older brother were men who kept their word, and even 15-year-old Ed was a cold, composed, and impassive fellow. He patted her head and told her it was okay to cry. The moment he said he would be on her side, her tears welled up. She felt as if he was radiating light. That evening, she dressed up carefully, ready to begin her lessons. The moment the Countess showed a surprised expression, she started getting nervous about her curtsy, while the Countess was simply worried she had nothing left to teach her. She greeted the Saintess with a sweet smile and suggested they begin their lesson. Violet just shyly averted her gaze and agreed. She secretly hoped she wouldn't be hit, at least not today. They were learning a new move, and she ended up messing it up. The Countess gently touched the girl's chin, tenderly corrected her posture, and told her how to lift her chin better. Every instruction was gentle and clear, and the girl immediately understood what to do. Violet was surprised by the way the Countess praised her. After every success, she would encourage the Saintess, saying she was doing a great job. The Countess suggested they have lunch together and then move on to table manners. Just hearing those words sent a shiver down the Saintess's spine. Countess Raquel decided to start directly with practice to teach her the basics. She was well aware of the Saintess's problems and felt deep sympathy for her. She told the girl not to worry, that she would correct her. Dining was Violet's biggest weakness, and it always made her anxious. Upon hearing the Countess's first instruction, she froze. She apologized, but the lady simply smiled at her mistake. The Saintess listened intently to every word her new teacher said. When she felt she was gripping the knife too tightly, she started to panic and then accidentally dropped it on the floor. When the Saintess stood up and bowed her head, Countess Raquel was taken aback. She said she was ready for any punishment. The Countess was shocked that the Saintess expected to be hit for making a mistake. She asked if the Viscountess had really raised her that way. The Saintess squeezed her eyes shut in fear, thinking she was about to be hit. To her surprise, Countess Raquel just gently hugged the poor girl. The lady told her to calm down, saying she wouldn't hit her. She promised there would never be any violence between them. Her sincere and sympathetic eyes gave her the confidence that she wouldn't be hit. The Countess smiled and told her to hurry and sit at the table. The Saintess tried again and finally succeeded. Because of her teaching methods, the girl became more at ease and much more confident. Under the lady's gentle care, her skills began to improve by leaps and bounds. With such support, she felt like everything was finally going her way. Then, 2 whole seasons passed, and winter arrived. The Countess pointed out that it looked like it would snow soon. The girl couldn't believe she had been here for so long. The Countess noticed the Saintess's gaze was drawn to something. Violet confessed that her birthday was in a week. This simple sentence immediately made their expressions darken. A few days passed, and the atmosphere in the house became even stranger. From that day on, the servants were running around the mansion frantically. She was very confused as to why everyone seemed so excited. She didn't even understand why, and made her wear such a gorgeous dress on her birthday, which was not her style at all. When, and led her to a huge door, Violet froze. Finally, the maid smiled and wished her a happy 11th birthday. This was the first time anyone had put so much effort into celebrating her birthday. As the door opened, she saw a dazzling hall. The girl could hardly believe they had done all this for her, and said everyone was here to celebrate her birthday. Normally, a Saintess's birthday was only celebrated throughout the kingdom, starting from her 16th year. Even so, the Marquis decided to hold a formal celebration. Violet was still suspicious of the man, feeling he would use this opportunity to test everything she had learned. Even Jack had baked a huge strawberry cake for her. All the ladies present were congratulating the Saintess. They smiled and gathered around her, saying how much they wanted to meet her. The girl thanked them, still not believing they were really there for her. Violet turned around when she heard some familiar male voices. The Marquis's 2 sons appeared before her, their handsome looks stunning everyone. Daniel smiled sweetly and wished her a happy birthday. He complimented her, saying the dress suited her name perfectly. Daniel also said she had mastered her etiquette and become a true lady. Violet breathed a sigh of relief, glad she hadn't messed anything up. Adrian was the same as ever, complaining that he couldn't have his fencing practice. He asked why he had to celebrate someone else's birthday. You can imagine his surprise when he was told he could go to his fencing lesson. He asked in disbelief, which made him burst out laughing. The girl added that if he didn't want to celebrate her birthday, he didn't have to stay. Mortified, he shot towards the exit like an arrow. When the adults walked towards them, Violet froze. The Marquis was walking with Count and Countess Rysel. Her mentor introduced her to her good-natured husband. The Marquis also joined in congratulating the young Saintess. Violet still didn't understand why he was holding all this for her. She also noticed Count Rysel staring at her, clearly impressed. To her surprise, the Marquis suddenly stood in front of her, blocking her from view. The Count immediately demanded he move, saying he wanted to get a good look at her. But no matter how much he pleaded, the Marquis didn't budge. The man kept calling out to the Saintess, trying to get her to come out. Violet looked at the Marquis in surprise when he refused. The Count tried to bring his own daughter over, but to no avail. The Saintess didn't understand why the man was smiling so slyly. The Count dramatically raised his hands and announced that it was time for presents. He was going to have a servant bring it over, but decided to present it himself. The girl was very excited to receive such a big gift. She immediately thanked the Count, even though she had no idea what was inside. Daniel nudged her, saying he was also curious about what was in it. As soon as she opened the box, she hugged a teddy bear. Like a child, she was thrilled with the huge stuffed toy. Before, because her family was poor, she couldn't even touch a toy. She remembered the toy she was denied and realized this bear was even bigger than that one. When all the colorful decorations burst into bloom, everyone present was stunned. The Countess witnessed the flowers blooming right before her eyes. She suddenly realized that the Saintess was using her power. It seemed even Violet herself didn't know how she did it. Immediately, everyone began to praise what she had done. Violet looked up as if she couldn't believe she was the one who made the flowers bloom. It felt like even the flowers were wishing her a happy birthday. When and suggested taking the toy to her room, she readily agreed. Daniel flinched at the sight of the old face. The girl was left alone with the creepy Marquis. She asked if she could go outside for a moment. As soon as he said yes, she quickly thanked him and rushed out. Violet had only slipped out because she felt awkward, not knowing where to go. She was about to head back to her room when she overheard some people talking. It turned out those women were bad-mouthing her. They were even mocking the Marquis family for throwing such a lavish birthday party for a nobody. They also said that everyone came for his sons, not for the Saintess. Their sharp, bitter words hit the girl like an avalanche. She ran forward, not understanding the reason for all this hypocrisy. She felt it was unfair that they hated her just because of her origins. She sobbed resentfully, having to hear such bullshit on her birthday. Violet never wanted to be in this position, nor did she ever choose her own destiny. Her tears turned into flowers, but she didn't want to see anyone. In the end, she ran outside and plopped down on the ground. Unlike inside the palace, out in the garden, no one said she looked silly. A young man's voice broke her silence, surprised to find her here. He calmly asked her to get up from the ground. Seeing no reaction, he gently shook her hand. Violet had never seen someone so beautiful. He was like an angel. She initially thought he was a woman, but he told her he was a man. Violet was immediately embarrassed, but he just laughed it off. The stranger asked her why she was crying. The girl didn't want to tell him the real reason she was so upset. She was afraid he would also start making fun of her origins. He said he came specifically to find her, but seeing her cry was upsetting him. He added that he was even more upset when she wouldn't tell him why. Violet didn't understand why he looked like he was about to cry, as if it had happened to him. She looked away, but still confessed the reason for her distress. The girl explained how everyone was mocking her for being stupid and poor. The man suddenly hugged her and guessed that she must have had a hard time. When he asked if it was hard for her to live like this, she burst into tears. He told her that the world was full of happiness, and she was just unlucky. The girl refuted this, saying the world was full of pure misfortune. She mentioned all her sisters who were very unlucky in life. Violet began to size up her companion again. She still couldn't believe a man could be that good-looking. She was embarrassed when she realized he had caught her staring at him. He turned his head and asked if she missed him too. The man said he missed her like crazy, as if he knew something she didn't. He stopped mid-sentence and added that he had been waiting for her for a long time. Violet froze, not understanding why she hadn't noticed it until now. It was the first time she had noticed his clothes, which looked like a priest's robes. He looked at her and said he came for her, and that was all. He added that he didn't care about her origins and wouldn't hurt her. Finally, he held out his hand, inviting her to go with him. It seemed he had succeeded in gaining her trust and making a good impression. She was about to leave, but the Marquis' eldest son beat her to it. Violet was completely stunned when a blade appeared beside her. Esselman's sword was pointed straight at the mysterious fellow. He coldly demanded that the man identify himself. The unnamed fellow just kept smirking, looking him straight in the eye. It seemed that before he got an answer, he had no intention of lowering that sword. Violet collapsed to the ground in fear, feeling drained of all her strength. The young man said he was just a passing priest. Ed scolded him to stop playing games, as his words sounded more like a taunt. The man said he hoped to meet King Tigernan, the son of Ermengarde. The Saintess was stunned, racking her brain to remember who he was talking about. Her brother said he wasn't on the guest list. The fellow sneered and asked what he should do since he was already here. He added menacingly that anyone who touched him would not go unpunished. Violet was shocked by the swift change in his whole demeanor. Esselman lowered his sword, declaring that the Saintess belonged to his family. Despite this, the priest stood his ground. He said he doubted others thought the same. He smiled again and walked over to the girl sitting on the ground. The young man gently took her hand and told her there would be consequences. He pulled her up and said that next time she should take his hand on her own. Before leaving, the stranger gently kissed the palm of her hand. Then he turned and walked away without another word. As soon as they were alone, Ed asked if her father had warned her. Violet turned around, realizing he was probably furious. It was obvious the Marquis would have been enraged if she had taken that man's hand. The memory of her sister's deaths flashed through her mind again. Ed shouted that if she still wanted to stay here, they would be at her service. Violet didn't want to go back, afraid of what everyone would say. She turned around, deciding not to return to that house. The girl walked downstairs, wondering if there was even one sincere person at her party. Ed leaned down to her and asked if she wanted all the flowers in the garden too. Bloom. She was stunned, looking at the garden blooming before her. The girl couldn't believe her power had erupted completely spontaneously again. Violet stared at the beautiful sight, dumbfounded. Ed told her that her kindness was not in vain. The girl looked at her stubborn brother with a searching gaze. She couldn't help but wonder if he realized how hurtful his casual words were. She felt a renewed anger at everything he said and took off his coat. He was about to say she would catch a cold, but she wouldn't listen at all. Ed suddenly asked if she regretted not going with that priest. She suddenly screamed that she did regret it. You could tell she poured all her anger and resentment into those words. Now, she felt that she really should have gone with him then. At that time, she had no idea of his true intentions. She thought he was a complete saint. Right now, she was just confused by the fact that her brother was following so closely behind her. She had to stop when his hand grabbed her by the waist. Violet started shouting for him to let go, but he didn't budge. He just stared at the flowers as if nothing had happened. A dazzling garden appeared before them. He kept holding the girl and said the gardener would have a hard time. Violet blurted out that she hated him more than anyone. She even said she hated his polite act, but that only provoked him. He held her down and told her he wouldn't let her run away to the temple. Ed said he was sick of her childish bullshit and that she should at least respect their father. It seemed this made her start to reflect on her actions. She mentally cursed herself as an idiot for ever seeing him as a prince. Violet found it strange how he treated people like a burden. He continued to walk with her in his arms, which made her feel even more ashamed. After what felt like an eternity, they finally returned to the palace and was relieved to see the sullen girl. Back in bed, she wondered why her eyes were red, but the Saintess refused to go to the party and immediately started talking about how much effort the Marquis had put into throwing the party. Violet hid under the covers and said she never asked him to. Although she was sad, she worried if and would be punished. She didn't want her to get hurt, so she crawled out from under the covers. She asked the maid irritably why she was laughing. Violet admitted she was angry that Ed had grabbed her like a sack of potatoes and laughed so hard her stomach hurt. She replied that the master had really rushed to prepare such a party. The maid recalled all the preparations they had completed. It seemed her words had indeed reached the hurt little Saintess and suggested she pretend to be sick as an excuse to be absent. She added that otherwise, Violet might be punished. In the end, Violet fell asleep, waiting for the Marquis to find out she was sick. The moment he looked at the child, he knew she was faking it and confessed that she was the one who told her to do it. The maid said the Saintess had fought with her brother and came back crying. At first he thought it was Adrian, but it turned out to be Lord Ed. The Marquis was surprised to hear that Esselman had argued with the child and tried to recount their conversation. The man frowned at the way Ed had carried the Saintess. He couldn't figure out why that would put her in such a bad mood. The maid immediately began to speculate on what might have annoyed the girl. The Marquis agreed, saying Ed had messed up this time. He fell silent and looked at the sleeping girl again. The man quietly knelt beside her, trying to get a good look at his daughter. He smiled, seeing her sleeping so soundly after making the entire garden bloom. Now he was certain that this girl was the real Saintess. Seeing flowers bloom in winter was a shock to him. Everyone present was stunned by the true miracle. Besides the invited guests, there were also some uninvited ones. The old man appeared, who turned out to be the right-hand man of the Duke of Dawn, and curtsied and explained that the Saintess was unwell and could not attend. He felt it was just an excuse, but there was nothing he could do. The Marquis was relieved that and had shown up in time. They couldn't let the Duke get even a glimpse of Violet. He used to think feigning illness was classless, but now he saw things differently. He came to his senses when Anne's maid greeted him. She handed him a teddy bear, and he told her to put it next to him. The next morning, the Saintess noticed the bear had changed. She didn't understand why the green ribbon had been changed to purple, seeing the girl's confusion, and told her she needed to wash up quickly. In a flash, the girl was all cleaned up and smiled, seeing that the girl wouldn't let go of her toy for a second. The girl was about to answer when the Marquis came in and interrupted her. He pretended to believe her lie and asked how she was feeling. She agreed, then heard that her immense power had even surprised Duke Tegranin. The Saintess didn't understand why he would be at the celebration. She also wasn't sure if she should tell him about the priest boy. After much thought, she shook her head pensively. The Marquis couldn't help but notice the change in the toy. He decided to change the subject and asked if she liked it. He told her she could keep it for as long as she wanted, which made her day. The Marquis was relieved to see her smile, as he thought she hated his guts. The girl smiled sincerely and thanked him for letting her have it. The man smiled gently, wanting to burn this moment into his memory. Later that day, the girl was scheduled for a lesson with Countess Raquel. The lady said she was very worried when she heard she had fainted. It was no wonder she was exhausted. After all, she had made the entire garden bloom. Even the nobles who were unhappy about the ball's cancellation were left speechless with joy. On top of that, the Marquis distributed some of the flowers, and the guests left completely satisfied. The Countess went on to say that winter flowers were an unspeakable luxury. She gave her an iris, saying they were proof of God's love. The girl pensively pinched the flower in her hand, thinking about God's love. It suddenly occurred to her that if God existed, he would be like that young man. She couldn't believe Ed had dared to point his sword at someone like that. The girl still didn't understand her eccentric brother's motives. She clenched her fists and decided she would definitely study hard today. And with that, they finally began their lesson. The Countess decided to read her a book about how great the Saintess's power was. She asked if I knew the story of Malam's first coming, and the story of that Saintess. Her name was Aggression, and the entire kingdom was named after her victory. Violet remembered that legend being read to her often as a child. The Countess asked if I had heard of the previous Saintess, Anastasia. The lady smiled and suggested we start with that story. It was said that she was the most beautiful and the closest to God. About 120 years ago, she suddenly disappeared, thus earning the nickname the legendary Saintess. She was born in the house of Marquis Bell and awakened her powers at the age of 8. Anastasia possessed the most powerful abilities and defeated Malam in record time. Not only that, but she also repelled the attacks of the pagan Ganalians. Violet sighed, asking if she too had to defeat Malam. The Countess smiled and nodded, but the girl could hardly imagine the scene. The Countess pointed out the ban established by the first king. No one was to interfere in the sacred battle between the Saintess and Malam. The girl felt uneasy, knowing that all the Saintesses had been raised in luxury. Unlike them, she had only learned to read in basic etiquette growing up, and even her name sounded somewhat out of place and unworthy of the title. She asked the Countess about the reason for the ban, and the woman guessed he simply wanted to avoid casualties. A wave of panic washed over the girl, and she wondered when Malam would come. Records showed that he always appeared after the Saintess came of age. Violet requested a glimpse of Saintess Anastasia's portrait, but the Countess replied sadly that not even a single one remained in the temple. It was an order from the 167th king, Demetrius, who was said to be the grandfather of the current King Triton, though she would learn more about these things later. The Countess told her not to mention these things in front of others. She gazed thoughtfully out the window, thinking of King Demetrius. Violet was shocked to learn that he had once loved a Saintess. She strolled through the garden, admiring the splendid and fragrant flowers. The king's love for Saintess Anastasia became a well-known legend. He was mad for her, as if she were an angel sent from heaven. But he later flew into a rage and ended up destroying all her portraits and statues. And guess what? He lived to be over 100 and was still whispering her name on his deathbed. The remaining portraits and statues were also smashed under the orders of his son, Astor. The girl felt sad for the strange love-hate relationship between the father who was obsessed with the Saintess and the son who hated her. She looked at the roses, still unable to believe she had done all this. Violet froze, standing in the middle of the vast and beautiful garden. She leaned closer to the flowers, feeling their fragrance, as if it were singing to her. She was so captivated that she didn't even notice someone else was there. The Duke approached and asked her not to let so many flowers bloom next time. Caught off guard, the girl tried to figure out when exactly he had arrived. She quickly sized up the strange man, sensing an ominous aura. She didn't know whether she should run or stay. Violet remained frozen in place and bluntly asked who he was. The man just smiled silently, gazing intently at the holy woman. He hesitated to answer, as he didn't even know how to tell her. He grinned and sheepishly introduced himself as just a passing priest. The Duke tried to make a good impression, but Violet wasn't buying it. She doubted how he could have appeared so coincidentally 2 days in a row. The man took a step closer, saying he had really enjoyed yesterday's miracle. She shivered when he asked if she was tired. The Duke noted, with a predatory glint in his eye, that the Saintess was wary of him. She just wanted to know if he had the Marchioness's permission. She thought of Daniel, but the Duke said the second son already knew he would be coming. To be honest, he hadn't expected to actually meet the Saintess at all. He thought they all assumed he had already gone back. Violet thought to herself that he was unlike any priest she had ever met. She happened to notice that the white flower in his hand was withering. The girl couldn't figure out why he looked so damn familiar. She decided to find out and boldly asked for his full name. The man's expression darkened like the sky above them, and then he introduced himself as Cesare. Violet froze, noticing the peculiar color of his eyes. She immediately remembered the priest from yesterday with the golden eyes. Besides him, their king also had eyes like that. The girl started to worry and asked if he had come to take her away. He simply smiled and replied that he would do as she wished. He stood silently as an unknown power absorbed the flower in his hand. Violet watched in amazement as it shone with a bright and beautiful light. The man smiled and said that she possessed a stronger and nobler power. He added that she could use her power, but she shouldn't bring plants back to life. Cesare said it was just the law of nature. Plants must sleep in the winter and awaken in the spring, right? The Saintess had awakened the sleeping plants, so now they had to go back to sleep. He touched the flowers, calling death a painful process. Cesare wasn't threatening her, but Violet felt a strange emptiness. She turned and saw how much the clear weather had changed. For the first time, she wondered what a huge mistake she had made. She had once loved these flowers, but now she realized they were dead. Tears welled up in her eyes because of the sin she had committed. She looked at the flowers and said she didn't mean for any of this to happen. Violet blurted out that it had happened when she was crying. The man was angry to learn that she had cried yesterday. Cesare asked coldly just who had made her cry. She didn't want to name names, but he kept pressing. She admitted that she had overheard the ladies who visited yesterday. The girl added that no one would want to visit a commoner in a godforsaken place like this. He wiped away her tears, saying no one dared to speak to the Saintess that way. Cesare said they were just frauds who didn't understand how the world truly worked. Violet froze, smelling the soft yet rich scent of cologne on him. She felt a sense of peace in his loving embrace. He smiled, calling every one of her tears incredibly precious. Cesare stroked her hair, saying that even a single drop of her blood was a miracle from God. He turned and suggested she look at the flowers. The girl was alarmed to find that her tears had brought the flowers back to life again. Cesare just said calmly that there was nothing to be afraid of. He added that this was precisely why he was here. He snapped his fingers, and a divine power was released into the air. The next moment, it spread throughout the garden, killing all the flowers. He smiled in the dead garden and said that he had returned everything to the laws of nature. Cesare added that it wouldn't be hurt anymore, but she felt terrified. He explained that the flowers were just sleeping and that they would see it again in the winter. Violet lowered her head and asked if she had messed things up badly. He explained that the flowers woke up because they missed her. Cesare claimed that they went to sleep happily, knowing there was a Saintess. He added that they were looking forward to seeing her again. Seeing that she didn't answer, the man told her to go back to the mansion. He was surprised when she turned and asked if she would see him again. The question made him very happy, and he answered yes. Cesare pressed his forehead against hers and promised to come see her again. Afterward, the troubled girl went home. She was still thinking back on everything that had recently happened to her, and rushed to her side as if she had been gone for days. Violet reminded her that she had said she was going to the garden, and admitted she had forgotten, but all that mattered was that she was back. She looked ahead and saw a sight that left her completely stunned. It seemed the other servants had noticed too. The butler narrowed his eyes, trying to figure out what had changed the landscape. Everyone was stunned, shaken by the ominous sight of the garden. Just a moment ago it was in full bloom, and now everything had withered. They all immediately thought that only the Duke could have done this. That very evening, as it rained, the Marquis rushed home. Daniel tried to tell him everything was fine, but he didn't believe it. He only calmed down after seeing Violet. She was sitting on the sofa, and in that moment, he felt all his anxiety melt away. Their surprised gazes met, and not a word was spoken. Daniel immediately rushed to the girl as if she were a phantom. He signaled to his father that the Saintess was safe and sound. The man just sighed wearily and agreed with his son. The girl didn't understand why the Marquis had come to see her. The Marquis asked if she had seen any strangers that day. The child decided to lie, knowing that someone might get hurt if she didn't. She claimed she hadn't touched the flowers and didn't know why they had died. The man could smell the lie on his stepdaughter, but he didn't want to press her. Daniel asked with a smirk if some strange guy had approached her. He was caught off guard when they told him to stop talking nonsense. The eldest son said the Saintess was too young to understand many things. Daniel disagreed, believing that Violet understood everything. Ed's face fell, and he asked if it was okay for the Saintess to have met the Duke of Tagnan. The girl froze when they talked about the Duke again. She remembered the red-haired man, but he had introduced himself as a priest. He had also shown his power, which made everyone doubt if he was a priest at all. Ed angered Daniel by saying he wasn't being polite, but a coward. He argued that their father would never let the Duke into their home. The Saintess was confused as to why Ed was only talking to Daniel. She threw her teddy bear, stood up, and realized she had to protect him. She yelled at her eldest brother to stop being a bully. She added that he had done his best, which surprised the men. Violet didn't want to cry, but the two men were scaring her. She was terrified at the thought that they would now take everything away from her and Daniel. The Marquis took a step closer and told her she had misunderstood. The girl froze, her eyes widening in fear at her stern father. Ed's defiant gaze weighed even more heavily on her. He turned away in disgust and left the girl without another word. The Marquis told Daniel one last thing, that he needed to calm the Saintess down. He then left them alone, knowing Violet only trusted his son. As if sent from heaven, it started to pour rain outside again. Daniel asked her why she said those things when she was so scared of them. His expression darkened when she explained she just wanted to protect him. She said she didn't do it out of kindness, but because she trusted him. The child smirked and then asked again, just to make sure he heard right. The girl turned away and said he was her precious brother. His heart fluttered when she added that he was her everything. The smile returned to his face as he replied that she was his everything, too. She seemed surprised at first, but then the boy's answer made her very happy. The next moment, he knelt down and hugged his little sister. The girl realized that as the only blonde child around, he probably felt lonely too. It occurred to her that maybe he also needed care and support. A few minutes later, she blurted out that she was suffocating from the hug. He lowered his head and asked if they could stay like this for a little longer. Violet was willing to endure it if it would make him feel better. After that day, the Marquis wasn't seen at the estate for several days. The girl continued her lessons, still giving it her all. She buried her nose in her books and worked hard on her assignments. Violet's handwriting wasn't good, but Daniel was helping her study. About 10 days later, the Marquis finally returned to the estate. He gave the girl a brand new, super realistic doll. She was surprised when he said he bought it especially for her. Violet felt a little awkward, but thanked her father for the gift. She froze when he asked if she was feeling better, alluding to her illness. The girl felt a pang of guilt and told him she was much better now. The Marquis also admitted that Ed had been severely scolded for the incident. The man was convinced his behavior had been disrespectful. He looked away and assured his daughter that it wouldn't happen again. The Saintess was glad he had made an effort. He wanted to pat her on the head, but she got scared again. She thought he was going to hit her, but he immediately stopped his hand. The girl looked in surprise at the man sitting before her. She saw sadness on his face when he told her to stay at the estate. It was a real blow to the Saintess as she was about to leave her family. That night, her brothers came out to see her off. Daniel smiled and asked her to send him a message when she arrived. He told her not to worry, as the people there were all good people. Adrian said he didn't need a letter from her because her handwriting was terrible. He added that if she sent him one, he'd be happy to teach her how to write better. Daniel chimed in that his grammar wasn't great either, and Violet probably couldn't read his chicken scratch anyway. The kid got angry right away, and was right there. She decided to take the girl away before the conversation could go any further. Violet noticed Ed, who hadn't said a single word. She couldn't understand why he was staring at her like that. Finally, she snapped back to reality when she heard them say it was time to go. The girl walked sadly to the carriage, wondering if she would ever see this place again. She gazed at the mansion, unsure if they would ever let her come back. Violet hesitated, not knowing if she should take her brother's hand. Ed, as usual, was frozen and said nothing. In the end, she took his hand and walked up the steps. Before she left, he said she would have some time to herself. Violet was taken aback, pondering his strange remark. She left without answering her brother. The girl was completely confused, not knowing how long she would be alone. This was the first time she had left the mansion since going to the palace. The Saintess began to feel that the Marquis no longer wanted to shelter her, and sensed her thoughts and asked if she was upset about it. She explained that the Marquis was worried about her, so she should keep a low profile at first. She didn't understand what the maid was talking about. She replied thoughtfully that she would understand when she was older. Finally, and let it slip that she would only be there for about 2 months at most. The maid excitedly pointed out that the first snow of the year was falling. Violet did the same, gazing intently at the winter wonderland. They were surprised that the snow was falling so quickly and so early. The estate was located in the north, where it was much colder. As night fell, they finally arrived at the estate. Both of them were stunned by the sheer size of the place. Violet began to wonder how they would pass the time here, and wasn't sure, but suggested they continue with their etiquette lessons. The girl perked up when someone offered to give her a tour of the estate. She thought she could read a book and then write a letter to Daniel afterward, and was relieved to know that the Saintess was welcome here. She also thought it would be a good idea to practice her divine power. Violet felt a little lost, as she had never done anything like this before, and insisted that learning this skill was absolutely necessary. She kept talking, but the Saintess was distracted and didn't hear a thing. Even as she tried to fall asleep, she was still racking her brain about how to control her powers. She knew that eventually she would have to live up to the title of Saintess. Violet was worried she wouldn't be able to handle the rest of her duties. A few minutes later, she finally fell asleep. She was surprised to find herself standing in an endless field under a vast sky. She looked up and saw a familiar-looking girl standing before her. The stranger looked like a more mature version of Violet herself. The stranger greeted her with a gentle smile and then closed her eyes. The stranger said that if Violet could see her, she must have gotten stronger. The girl said nothing, surprised to feel tears on her cheeks. Something was making her sad, and her heart ached. The woman touched her cheek and asked why she was wiping her tears away so quickly. Violet mentioned what the priest had said about reviving the plants. The former Saintess smiled and asked what happened next. The girl said he made all her flowers wither. The Saintess froze, the wise smile vanishing from her face. Violet clutched her dress sadly, calling herself useless. She still thought God had made a mistake in choosing her. The Saintess said she was definitely her child, and that it was sad to hear her say that. She said to hold out my hand if I doubted my power. The girl did as she was told, and then closed her eyes. The woman told her to focus on her power first. Violet didn't know what to do until she saw a bright light. She realized she had felt this source before, the one from which she drew her energy. The girl understood that it was the same as that day in the garden. She felt a thrill when the Saintess told her to open her eyes. Violet could hardly believe she possessed such incredible power. She looked at the woman who seemed to be transmitting her own power. Their combined focus caused a beautiful tree to grow. The former Saintess smiled, remembering the girl, said she felt sorry for the flowers. She called the priest kind by nature, but he only saw things from a human perspective. All living things are born knowing they will die one day. So the flowers bloomed simply because they wanted to see her. Violet didn't understand why they would choose to do that instead of waiting for spring. The Saintess replied that for living things, only the present matters. The flowers chose the present over an uncertain future. They made their choice and accepted all the pain that came with it. She caressed the girl's cheek and told her not to be too sad. The Saintess smiled, said she would get through this, and then disappeared. Violet woke up as the sun was rising. Afterward, she was stunned by how real the dream had felt. Looking at her hands, she realized she had used her power even in her dream. Violet decided to try what she did in her dream, and with a pop, a bright light appeared. She was stunned. She had learned to shape it in just one dream. Once she was ready, she decided to go out for a walk, and noticed she was distracted and asked what she was thinking about. The girl dodged the question and reminded her of their plans. The maid said she was born and raised on this very estate. She loved this place, even with its harsh and cold weather. The three young masters were born and raised here before moving to the capital. The maid smiled and pointed her to a tree in the distance. She said that thing was the oldest tree on the estate, and her mother was madly in love with it for some reason. It later stopped blooming and withered completely. Violet happened to find out that Anne's mother had also passed away. She felt sad when she realized the Marquis sons had also lost their mother in their childhood. She didn't understand why she had ever thought her pain was deeper than anyone else's. Violet felt a pang of guilt for her previous thoughts, and suddenly remembered there was a stable on the other side of the estate. The girl couldn't refuse, so they decided to check it out. Despite the smell, she really liked the atmosphere of the place. The stable master happened to see the two girls wandering around, looking interested. It turned out that the stable master was Anne's grandfather. The old man almost lost his composure when he found out the girl next to her was the Saintess. He tried about to show his respect for her coming all this way. The man added that it was a great honor for him and that he was very moved. They continued to chat about daily matters, but Violet wasn't really listening. She was stunned by how many horses there were on the estate. She dashed past the adults and went straight to one of the stallions. The stable master called for a boy and told him to greet the Saintess. The girl froze, staring at the guy named Tommy. His face felt strangely familiar to her. The boy approached a little shyly and greeted the Saintess. The moment she saw his face, she knew who he was. Violet flashed back to her days living in the slums. She just wanted to play with everyone, but she was a complete outcast. Everyone saw her as nothing more than the butcher's poor daughter, and even the other children's parents thought she wasn't good enough to play with their kids. Violet wanted to hide, but someone called out to her. A mischievous boy smiled and asked if she wanted to join their game. The little girl glanced at the boy, Tommy, and nodded. When he suggested playing hide and seek, the other children burst out laughing. Violet was thrilled and found a good hiding spot waiting to be found. Unfortunately, they tricked her, leaving her sitting there until it got dark. After the sun went down, her parents found her and the realization hit her. She understood they never intended to play with her and burst into tears. From then on, she only watched them play from the sidelines. She was surprised that Tommy was fawning over her so much. Guessing he didn't recognize her, she looked at the beautiful horse. He tried to talk to her, but she couldn't understand the language of large animals. Violet reached out to touch the horse, wondering if she could truly understand animals. As she grew up, Tommy remembered how stubborn that horse was and was startled. He began to panic, worried the animal would hurt the Saintess. But my goodness, he was surprised to see the horse was very docile. The Saintess's gentle gaze showed that everything was under her control. The moment their eyes met, Tommy's face suddenly turned bright red. Surprised by his reaction, Violet decided to ask him directly. After a brief pause, she asked if he remembered her. The boy pretended not to know what she was talking about, looking confused by her question. The moment she took off her beret, he recognized Violet. He couldn't believe she had actually become the Saintess. The girl just smiled and said it was true. When he reminded her that she was just a commoner, she clenched her fists. He held his head, still not believing someone like her could become the Saintess. The boy tried to justify himself, saying that previous Saintesses were all nobles. Although his words were hurtful, she knew he had a point. She decided to change the subject and asked him to feed the horse. While they were feeding the horse, the boy admitted that from a distance, she looked like a real lady. The Saintess was happy, feeling her lessons hadn't been in vain. The boy casually asked how her parents were doing. Violet's expression darkened, but she still told him how they had passed away. She couldn't help but recall the day they were murdered in front of her. Unfortunately, they were killed in the most brutal way. Tommy awkwardly blurted out that his father was gone, but his mother and grandmother were still alive. The girl was secretly relieved that at least someone from the village had survived. Tommy explained that his mother worked outside the village and his grandmother was bedridden. He added that his mother and grandmother argued nonstop every day. Anyway, the two women were known for their constant bickering. Tommy was the only one who could bring home a decent wage. He laughed and said Violet was so lucky to have become the Saintess. The girl froze, feeling as if all her efforts had been for nothing. She admitted to herself that things were still difficult and that almost nothing had changed. She couldn't relax for a moment, always afraid of messing up. People still talked badly about her behind her back and made fun of her. The thought of having to overthrow Malcolm made her feel suffocated. Despite all this, she couldn't complain to him about it. Violet decided to at least give the boy some encouragement and took the warm scarf from her neck. Wrapping it around him, he was stunned by the sudden act of kindness. But she just smiled, and the boy, touching the soft scarf, shyly smiled back. He suddenly looked away and then called her name. Tommy confessed that he felt bad for having bullied her. They talked until the sun went down. Violet left the stables and went back to her maid, and saw the boy wearing her scarf and smirked to herself. She smiled as she took off the warm, woolen cloak. The maid covered her with a blanket and asked if she enjoyed seeing the horses, and even felt that because Violet was in a good mood, the scent of the green plants was stronger. She suddenly remembered how frustrated the girl had been with those plants before. She just recalled the words of the Saintess in her dream and then shook off the thoughts. The girl said she was getting a better handle on her powers, and smiled sweetly and suggested they go back to the manor for some cocoa. Violet was thrilled by the suggestion and was completely absorbed in it afterward. The days passed, each one feeling the same, and was happy to discover that the Saintess's appetite had actually grown. She also overheard that the Saintess had been spending a lot of time in the stables recently. The servants gossiped that she was getting close to a stable boy. The estate's steward even said that the Saintess being a commoner was the best thing for all the servants. They immediately started chattering about the Saintess's origins. The servants kept gossiping until they saw the look on Anne's face. She was furious and stormed in like a gust of wind, scaring everyone back to work. The steward remembered that he couldn't ignore the daughter of the Marquis's right-hand man. They called him a steward, but you couldn't tell by looking at him, and suddenly realized she was the only one in the entire estate who was working diligently. She herself was just a servant, so she couldn't say anything to the others. Nevertheless, she was prepared to care for her lady with the enthusiasm of 10 people. Meanwhile, the Saintess was engrossed in a new book and loved watching her study so hard. She decided to casually mention to the Saintess that she still hadn't found her scarf. 2 days later, when Anne started muttering to herself about it, the Saintess broke out in a nervous sweat. When Anne asked if she knew anything, she said she had thrown the scarf away. The maid was almost amused by her childish innocence. She decided to ask directly about the stable boy. When she asked if he was an old friend of hers, the Saintess fell silent. As Anne left, she said she couldn't stand in the way of her happiness. Violet was taken aback by her calm attitude. While making the bed, and said she should still be mindful of people's gossip. Violet immediately understood what the maid was implying. She clutched her book, lost in thought, and said it was too much. The girl didn't want to give up a friend just because people might talk. When the girl repeated her words and froze, she was clearly upset and put down her book, and then the maid returned to her own room. That night, Violet contacted the Saintess again. The girl poured out her day's frustrations to her. The Saintess explained that the maid just wanted to protect her. Violet knew and was just worried, but she still felt a sting in her heart. The Saintess stroked her hair, saying she didn't mean to make her cry. Violet found it amazing how this wise woman seemed to see through everything. She wanted to figure out who she was, but the Saintess only gave her a riddle. The girl immediately started thinking of all the possible answers. Finally, she asked her directly if she was a goddess. The woman smiled smugly and said her answer was very interesting. She replied that now, Violet was her goddess. Her answer was so confusing that Violet was completely bewildered. The woman stroked her hand and told her she could see her as whatever she wished. She gave her another sweet smile and promised she would find out the truth about everything. Violet mentioned that she had already met someone who looked like a god. She added that he had golden eyes and silver hair. The goddess smiled and said she had already met that child. Violet guessed she knew him, but she just silently turned her head away. The goddess said that the maid girl would surely stay with her always. Her words made Violet feel she should apologize. The Saintess just smiled and said to go ahead if she wanted to apologize. The day came, but the girl still couldn't bring herself to say sorry. She guessed and might still be angry with her. After that incident, Tommy saw her and said she hadn't been coming around much lately. The boy put down a bale of hay and said his grandmother was sick again. The girl sadly suggested he get a healer. As soon as the words left her mouth, he gave her a look of disgust. He reminded her that his family had no money for a healer. In fact, Violet had stopped visiting Tommy because he complained nonstop and was becoming more and more arrogant. She knew he was after something, but she couldn't help him. So the girl decided to give him the only thing she owned. She thought if he sold the jewels on its eyes, he could afford a healer. Unfortunately for her, the gesture only angered the boy more. He threw the teddy bear on the ground and asked what good this thing was to him. Tommy was furious, looking like he wanted to tear her to pieces. Violet was stunned, watching her favorite teddy bear fall to the ground. She had meant well, but it had backfired. Tommy started roaring that she didn't understand and didn't need to hear any of his problems. She couldn't understand his situation because she had no family. Violet couldn't take it anymore and yelled back at him. When she asked what he really knew about her, he flinched. She wanted a family, but everyone close to her was dead. She added that he had no idea where or how she grew up. She had nothing either and had been beaten half to death. Violet tearfully pointed out that her life was hard too. It seemed Tommy hadn't expected her to open up like that. The little girl stepped forward and proudly held up her dirty toy. She said it was very important to her because it was a gift for her first birthday. Violet said firmly that she wouldn't be coming back. She ran in the opposite direction without looking back, not even waiting for a reply. Meanwhile, and was surprised that her lady wasn't at the stables. She thought she was in a bad mood all day yesterday. She racked her brain for a way to cheer her up. When and heard a strange noise coming from the room, she froze. She went inside and saw Violet frantically scrubbing her toy. The maid immediately scanned the room. She noticed everything. She was angry that the other maids didn't even help her fetch water, and bit her lip, barely able to control her emotions. She wanted to take the bear, but the Saintess refused to give it to her. The girl said she was good at doing laundry, but that didn't make him feel any better. It bothered her that the little girl seemed more confident in washing clothes than in reading books. She imagined how hard it must have been for her to get used to a life like that. Violet felt a gentle hug and almost burst into tears. The girl cried, saying she really had no one. Even so, people wouldn't stop talking badly about her. She didn't even know if it was her fault. When and told her it couldn't possibly be her fault, the girl broke down. After a while, Violet finally felt a sense of relief. She nodded, letting me know she felt a little better now, and promised she would wash the teddy bear and make it look brand new. She smiled when the Saintess humbly thanked her. Violet hated herself for getting angry at the person who always comforted her. She couldn't apologize with words, but an idea flashed in her mind. The Saintess turned to and asked her to follow her somewhere. They went straight to the tree bathed in moonlight, and couldn't understand why she had to come here of all places. The Saintess recalled that Anne's mother had wanted to see this tree bloom. The maid agreed, but it was impossible because the tree was too old. She was shocked when the Saintess said she would actually help. She just walked forward silently, ready to work her magic. The girl touched the trunk and focused all her attention. Slowly, her hands began to glow, shining with a blue light, and was stunned by the power of the young messenger of God. She couldn't believe her eyes when she saw the branches growing. In the end, the tree grew to an incredible size, as if it were an illusion, and thought she would never see this sight again. But her dream had come true. She had buried that scent with her memories, but now it was real again. Violet stood on her tiptoes and plucked just one flower. She held out a flower, letting me know it was an apology for yesterday. My heart warmed at the mere thought of it. I was completely captivated by this incredibly kind lady, Violet. With each passing day, I felt she was becoming more like my mother. It was impossible not to fall in love with her. The maid sincerely thanked her lady for the thoughtful gesture, then smiled. The next morning, and had to leave the estate. Until the last moment, she doubted if things would go smoothly. The Saintess reassured and, reminding her she would only be gone for a week. It turned out her father was sick and she had to cover for him. Violet urged her to go and asked her to deliver a letter, and agreed to the request and asked if she had a letter for the Marquis. The girl had prepared a letter, but she was worried it might have mistakes. The maid convinced her, saying the Marquis would be happy to hear anything. She patted the girl, mentioning that he had even sent her a beautiful fur coat. This gave her confidence, and she agreed to hand over the envelope, and carefully tucked the envelope away and walked to her carriage. She climbed in, promising to be back soon. Violet smiled and told her to spend more time with her father. She waved happily, watching the carriage drive away. The Saintess wanted to return to the estate peacefully, but something stopped her. She saw Tommy walking straight toward her. He looked completely lost. He had been harnessing a horse while trying to figure out what to say. She knew he wanted to talk, but she couldn't forgive him for what he did. She just walked away, still not wanting him near. Morning came, and Violet woke up completely stunned. She got up groggily, wondering why, and hadn't woken her. The dead silence reminded her that, and had returned to the capital. As she expected, the moment and was gone. The maids slacked off on their duties to the Saintess. Even the care from the maid assigned to her was far inferior to Anne's. It seemed all the maids wanted to do was gossip and speak ill of the Saintess. They always forgot to take care of her, but she handled everything herself. Other than that, she spent most of her time hiding in the library. Every day, she was ready to dive into a new book. Then one day, she got her hands on a book about the history of Grisha. The book constantly mentioned the importance of the Saintess. The Saintess sacrificed herself for the entire country, so she was basically royalty. By law, she was under the protection of both the Pope and the King. The girl began to doubt this, and remembered a lesson she had with the Countess. The Countess had told her about Pope Lindo, a person whose identity was a complete secret. The Saintess couldn't help but wonder if they would ever meet. She realized, and would be back in 2 more days. She froze when she heard a knock on the door behind her. The Saintess had given herself away by dropping a book in the library. She turned around slowly, tried to figure out who it was. She found it strange, as the maids never came to find her here. She cautiously approached the door and asked who was there. To her surprise, the stranger didn't answer. She felt a sense of menace, but her curiosity was stronger. The girl gathered her courage and decided to open the door. She was even more surprised when she saw a person. Tommy, whom she knew, was standing before her, nearly frozen from the blizzard. She was about to say something, but he lunged at her. He practically begged her to save his sick grandmother. The boy pleaded with her to save her with her divine power. Violet was completely caught off guard and yanked her hand back. She slammed the door shut so no one would hear and asked how he got in. She demanded he go back before he was found. He froze when she added that she didn't have that kind of power. The girl said that even if she did, she couldn't leave without permission. The boy stepped forward and said she could heal because of her divine power. He kept denying her words, but she really couldn't do those things. She lowered her head in guilt and asked him to leave again. You should have seen the look on her face when the arrogant guy suddenly dropped to his knees. He begged her to at least visit his grandmother, if only to make her happy. She couldn't bring herself to do it, but his tears broke her heart. The girl just watched him plead with tears streaming down his face. Tommy said she just needed to let his grandmother see her face, and that was all. He guilt-tripped her, saying she hadn't helped at all so far. Violet held her ground, saying the guards would surely catch them. Tommy said he knew a secret passage, so she could get out and back without any problems. She bit her lip, feeling 2 sides of her at war. He was her only friend from her hometown, and he was practically begging for help. She figured nothing bad could come of it and agreed. The girl said thoughtfully that she needed to be back soon. Tommy jumped up, beyond grateful to her. Afterward, the girl pulled up her warm hood, ready to go. They nervously peeked from behind the door, checking the situation. Tommy was delighted to see the estate's hallways were empty. They rushed toward the exit before they could be discovered. Violet followed the boy, trusting that she would be able to return. Meanwhile, the Marquis was lost in thought in his study. He was still pondering the letter written by his adopted daughter. He tapped the letter awkwardly, as if he couldn't bring himself to open it, and stood by nervously, waiting for him to finally make up his mind. She could tell he was eager to read it, but he was holding back. He decided to ask how her father was doing after his illness. The Marquis suggested she return to the estate with Daniel. The next second, Adrian burst into the room energetically. He shouted that he was going to the estate too. He was angry because his brothers were all going while he had to stay behind. It turned out Esselmond was also planning to go to the estate. Ignoring his tantrum, the Marquis simply stated Anne's request, except for Daniel. She agreed, and then tried to calm the child down. Bjorn, tired of his son's whining, finally let him go. He knew the spring festival in the west was approaching. On the first night of the week-long festival, a member of the feudal lord's family had to release the first lantern. Only then could the others release their own lanterns. With all this in mind, the Marquis finally decided to open the letter. He carefully opened the envelope and began to read. A smile appeared on his face as he read his daughter's clumsy words. He had no idea what kind of danger she was walking into. The girl had no idea there was a secret passage in the mansion. Luckily, Tommy knew the guard's shift change times, so they were able to slip past. Doubts crept in when she thought about how far his house was from the estate. Violet froze when he announced, "We're here." Before her was a dilapidated hut. The moment the door opened, the stench of poverty wafted out. Tommy called out for his grandmother. Violet took a step forward and heard a loud creak from the floor. Her blood ran cold when she saw the woman chained to the bed. Tommy's grandmother was breathing heavily, as if she were slowly dying with each breath. The grim sight made everything feel even darker. Violet was completely caught off guard. She was fine just a minute ago. The girl approached the bed, wondering if she could be of any help. She knew very well that she didn't have the power to save people yet. The Saintess touched the old woman's hand, feeling she had to do something. She released her power, regardless of the guilt she would feel afterward. In an instant, the woman who had been sleeping snapped her eyes open, as if signaling the boy standing behind her. He trembled all over in shame, begging for Violet's forgiveness. The girl looked around in surprise, not realizing she had walked into a trap. The next second, a large group of men rushed into the room, surrounding the little girl and frightening her with their foul laughter. She looked sadly at the person she had genuinely wanted to help, who was clutching his head and trembling, still begging for her forgiveness. Violet screamed for the first time, as if she couldn't believe what kind of situation he had dragged her into. The terrifying thugs continued to close in on her. They began to mock her, not believing she was truly a Saintess. With every additional taunt, Tommy apologized more forcefully. I think even he himself was disgusted by what he had done. Even so, his mother was praising him for his success. As she walked in, a thug roughly grabbed Violet's arm. He laughed and said the boss would like her hair. Without a doubt, her wrist hurt badly, and she cried out to Tommy for help. He began to tremble, saying he had no choice because of the pressure of medical bills. The thug clapped him on the shoulder and told him, "You can't fool a Saintess." He chuckled and said it was all to pay for his mother's liquor. He added that although Tommy had earned a lot of money, he had never called a doctor. It turned out he had spent all the money on his mother's alcohol. He felt his knees, begging them to stop saying those things. It seemed Violet realized that even this boy was being used. She couldn't help but think that he had betrayed her for a few drinks. His mother very slowly and dramatically extended her hand to the thug. He stuffed a few coins into her hand, saying he would put in a good word for him with the boss. The man ordered his subordinates to blindfold the Saintess and gag her. She tried to struggle, saying she needed to go back as soon as possible. The girl froze when a mercenary's sharp axe appeared in front of her. He advised them not to struggle with each other and to stay quiet. The mercenary sneered that torturing children wasn't their hobby. Before he could finish his sentence, the Saintess suddenly grabbed the axe. The man screamed and yanked her hand away from the sharp blade. They couldn't let her get hurt, or they would get less money. As they decided to put a bag over her head, the girl glanced at her former friend. Hope was draining from her body, and tears blurred her vision. She couldn't help but wonder if her heart would hurt less if Tommy had done this to save his grandmother. The mercenaries slung her over their shoulders, blindfolded her, and carried her out of the house. The girl squeezed her wound hard, trying to leave some kind of evidence. She remembered the Duke once said her blood was a gift from God. Violet didn't know if this would work, but she still held on to hope. Meanwhile, the Marquis' sons had just arrived at the estate. Esselman immediately narrowed his eyes, seeming to notice something was wrong, and asked Daniel, "Was it like this before you left?" The girl warily surveyed the scene, trying to figure out what was different. Eventually, they realized the entire estate was in chaos. All the servants were terrified because the Saintess had just disappeared. When the eldest son asked him what had happened, the Baron lowered his head. His usual arrogance was gone. The man shuffled his feet, not knowing how to begin. Daniel sensed the heavy tension and asked what on earth had happened. It seemed Esselman had already guessed, and he asked where the Saintess was. The Baron trembled even more, once again begging for forgiveness. He was prepared to die, but then the eldest son's expression changed everything. The man shut his eyes in fear and blurted out that she was gone, and was so shocked that her handbag slipped from her grasp. The younger brother was confused, as the estate's security was top-notch. The Baron agreed, but said they still couldn't find the young lady anywhere. Esselman felt a wave of disappointment, realizing he had completely failed to foresee any of this. He found that he hadn't even considered the possibility that she might just disappear. He hadn't even noticed her crying in the garden on her birthday. Ed knew she always did as she pleased. At this moment, he thought she had run away on purpose, and a surge of anger rose in him. The young man pulled himself together and ordered all servants and knights to assemble. He solemnly announced that he would personally lead the search. Within minutes, a troop was assembled before him. Ed was shouting orders, but En's mind was on only one thing. She knew the girl would never have run away on her own, nor would she have left with a stranger. An intuition flashed through her mind, and she immediately turned to Ed. She knew the girl well and insisted they needed to check the stables. No sooner had she spoken than they rushed over there. The stable hand told them that the Saintess had argued with Tommy and hadn't returned since. He said today was also the first time Tommy hadn't shown up, which surprised them. The man remembered that Tommy lived near the docks. As soon as they entered the slums, Ed had everyone stop. He noticed these glowing flowers growing from the Saintess's tears. Esselman tightened his reins. He knew something had made her cry. He changed direction and followed the trail of flowers directly. Meanwhile, the girl had been locked in a room for several days. From snippets of conversation, she guessed they were planning to sell her. Surprisingly, they hadn't laid a finger on her, instead keeping her in a warm room and giving her food at regular intervals. Even so, she had little appetite due to the stress. When the girl felt the leader staring at her, she turned her head. He said that as a representative of God, she deserved all the praise in the world. The man added that even as a slave, she would be an extremely valuable commodity. They tried to stop him, but he didn't believe in any God at all. He railed against the Pope and called Violet a monster. A smile appeared on his face when he heard the news that the traders had arrived. When Violet heard their client was on site, she felt a wave of pure terror. A few minutes later, they tied her up and dragged her outside like livestock. She kept squeezing blood from the wound on her arm. From their conversation, she began to panic, thinking they were going to sell her to the Pope. The leader kept scolding his men, demoralizing them. She trembled, trying to figure out who she would ultimately be sold to. The man said their client was no duke, nor any fancy marquis. He glanced at the suspicious-looking group and said their clients were from Gunnar. When Violet heard that familiar name, she froze. She remembered the day the Countess told her about them. These people refused to accept the concept of an absolute god. In Agria, the barbaric Gunnar people worshipped a god they called the Great Spirit. They were crude and uncivilized and wanted to conquer Agria, but were annihilated by Saintess Anastasia. After that, they established a vast nation called Gujarat and gave their leaders various different titles. Then, she found a man known as Kagan standing right in front of her. She began to struggle harder, which in turn made the leader smile. He said they probably wouldn't kill her. After all, they had paid such a high price. His triumphant words seemed to frighten the girl even more. She froze, staring in terror at these newly arrived strangers. Kagan slowly walked toward the girl, as if studying her. The man walked up to the girl and looked at her mark. She kept staring at him, not knowing what they were going to do to her next. Kagan ordered them to remove her gag, and a translator relayed the message. The leader began to undo her gag himself, without another word. Finally, the gag was removed from her mouth, and she could breathe properly. She didn't know why this guy was grinning like that. He just kept staring at her with his cunning green eyes. He looked her up and down, noticing there wasn't a single drop of blood. Kagan quickly grabbed her hand and found a cut on it. He immediately turned to the leader and began to scold him. The girl's face fell when she realized they had seen through her plan. The leader chuckled, guessing she had tried to leave a trail. When he looked behind her, his eyes widened in surprise. He saw flowers magically sprouting from her drops of blood. The leader grabbed her shoulders and stared at her with a burning gaze. Violet was terrified, not knowing what would happen next. A second later, she was slapped to the ground, getting a mouthful of dirt. He was furious, raging that their location had been completely exposed. Violet shut her eyes tightly, feeling her lips and cheek swell up. Kagan immediately confronted the leader for laying a hand on the Saintess. He was engrossed in the argument when he saw something strange. He saw the Saintess press her palm flat against the ground. In the blink of an eye, plants began to grow explosively everywhere. The Gunnar warriors were stunned by the Saintess's wild miracle. The leader roared in anger and raised his fist, trying to kill the girl. Before he could touch her, reinforcements rushed in. Violet looked up in surprise and saw familiar faces. She saw her brother nearly sever the mercenary's arm. It happened so fast the bastard didn't even have time to blink. Immediately after, his arm and sword fell into the water. Ed lowered his blood-stained sword and said it was an order from the Marquis of Ermengarde. Violet flinched, realizing she was finally safe. Ed ordered them to leave no one alive except for the Gunner people. The tribe members immediately rushed forward to protect their leader. Swords clashed, and just like that, the mercenaries fell. Violet replayed her brother's words about the Marquis of Ermengarde's order in her mind. She racked her brain, trying to remember where she had heard something similar before. Ed felt her gaze and gave her a stern glare. Violet lowered her head in surprise when she was suddenly pulled into an embrace. Esselman, with a serious expression, announced his name and title. He pointed his sword at them, telling them their country was not a place where they could do as they pleased. He looked directly at Kagan, who was surrounded by his tribe members. The young man kept his sword pointed, ordering them to go back where they came from. His opponent simply gave Saintess Violet a meaningful look. She felt his gaze and looked back in surprise. He grinned, and then said something that made no sense at all. When Esselman heard the last word, he frowned. The girl shivered, feeling like she hadn't understood anything. She was surprised that Kagan decided to leave just like that. A soldier ran up to them, excited that the Saintess had been found. Esselman silently turned to the girl and ripped the ropes from her wrists. He told them to tell Sir Besserhound to get out of here quickly. After that, he helped his sister onto a horse and rode ahead on his own. Violet looked around and saw a pile of bloody corpses. She froze in fear, trembling all over, but a voice she didn't recognize told her not to worry. The girl looked at the horse, as if it were the one telling her not to be afraid. This was the first time Violet had heard an animal speak to her like this. Meanwhile, Esselman was still racking his brain under immense pressure. He couldn't shake the phrase that leader had said. The phrase meant that he would undoubtedly return to take what was his. He kept muttering to himself until they finally returned to the estate. Daniel rushed out to meet them with a worried look on his face. He cried out when he saw the little girl so beaten up. He had been so worried and couldn't help but hug her tightly. Violet was completely caught off guard by this sudden outpouring of emotion. She saw the others and guessed they had come together. She finally realized what had just happened to her. The girl finally broke down, sobbing from exhaustion. Only Esselman kept watching her. Thoughtfully, he snapped at and telling her to stop coddling the Saintess. He stated firmly that she needed to understand the consequences of her choices, and didn't understand why he was being so harsh with Violet. Even the girl herself seemed surprised by everyone's reaction, and asked if he really had to take things this far. Ed reminded her not to talk back, and that she needed to take responsibility for what happened. Finally, he decided to settle the matter once and for all, and told her to follow him. His serious expression showed he wasn't joking. No one knew what he planned to do, but they did as he said. They entered a huge hall where everyone was lined up. As the victim, Violet had to stand next to Ed. She wrung her hands nervously, not knowing why they were here. The girl tensed nervously when she heard the doors being pushed open. She was completely stunned when Tommy walked into the hall. Seeing Tommy's family, the eldest son said he was sitting in this position on behalf of his father. All three of them began to beg him for mercy, tears streaming down their faces. Ed listed every single wrong they had committed. The woman tried to argue that it wasn't like that at all. She claimed they were just following orders under threat. Ed reminded her that it was the Saintess's duty to protect this land. He added that their actions were basically an attempt to divide the nation. The woman fell silent as fear began to set in, and she understood the price of her mistake. She said she knew nothing about the Gujarat people or anyone else. Tommy's mother was making excuses until the very end, but it only made him laugh. He told her she had no right to hand over the Saintess. Esselman slowly descended the steps, radiating pure terror. He looked down on the scum who had threatened the entire kingdom. Ed asked how their sick grandmother was looking so spirited. Tommy trembled and said it was the Saintess's power that had stopped the illness. Esselman stared at the girl as if waiting for her to interject. He announced that this was the first time the Saintess had ever bestowed a blessing on anyone. Then he drew his sword and cleanly cut off the liar's head, and flinched, not wanting to see the blood splatter. Tommy watched his grandmother die, as if he were watching a movie. Esselman roared fiercely, saying he would execute them all on the spot. Tommy's mother raised her hands, begging him to save them. Tommy thought he could persuade Violet, so he pleaded with her for help. After that betrayal, she didn't want to hear his pleas, but she still didn't want him to die and heard his cries. Out of pity, she rushed in front of Esselman with tears in her eyes, begging her brother not to do it. Violet even offered to take all the blame just to spare their lives. Ed replied, "You must understand the consequences of your choices." She said she understood and begged him to let them live. The blade in his hand stopped when she added, "Tommy was my only friend in the village." He told her icily to wake up and recognize her place. The girl came to her senses and screamed as he swung his sword again. She grabbed his cloak, watching as the woman's head rolled away. All the pain she had experienced came rushing back to her. She remembered the soldiers laughing at her dead sister, and something inside her broke as they kicked her head around like a ball. That incident made her realize the price of every choice she made. If she were sold to another country, it could mean the ruin of her nation. It wasn't her fault, and those people would get what they deserved. Even so, all this death was tearing her fragile soul apart. She was frozen like a statue when and walked into her room. The girl said fearfully that Violet had been asleep for 3 whole days. The Saintess just stared blankly at the maid. Anne's heart ached for her lost, traumatized appearance. She rushed forward to hug the girl, wanted to give her some support, and knew how hard it had been for her, but still asked how she was feeling. Violet still couldn't find the strength to answer. After a short silence, she said with resignation that she didn't want to live anymore. She didn't know that one of the sons was watching their conversation at that moment. To her, nothing mattered anymore except easing her pain. She just stared blankly at the ceiling, repeatedly saying she wanted to die. After she finished, Esselman quietly slipped out of the room. He left unhurriedly, leaving the girls alone. Even after the Saintess's kidnapping, they were still moving forward with that operation. It was a secret operation aimed at destroying a smuggling ring. They did this to prevent the Pope from gaining any leverage. The staff were all terrified, but the operation ended with the execution of some key figures. The days passed, but Violet still felt a hole in her heart. She turned around when Daniel asked what she was doing. The girl paused, then said she was just reading a book. He tried to comfort her, gently stroking her hair. She was well aware of how cruel and chaotic the whole thing had been. Daniel made a mental note that she hadn't smiled since that day. He wanted to see her smile, so he told her their aunt would be visiting soon. He anticipated Violet's surprise and explained it was his father's sister. She had married a count and lived further north. He added that she had a daughter named Annabelle, who was the same age as Violet. Daniel put on a friendly face, hoping they could become friends. Violet didn't respond at all, as she couldn't care less. Later that day, her younger brother Adrian came to see her. He tried to get the Saintess's attention, complaining about how bored he was. He kept interrupting her reading, which gradually started to annoy her. Violet impatiently told him to go for a walk. The boy stuck his tongue out resentfully, saying that was too boring. He also demanded that she call him by his name, just like she did with everyone else. Violet agreed to his request, which took the boy by surprise. He couldn't believe she had actually called him what he wanted. After receiving such a reward, Adrian was ecstatic. He smiled happily and called her sister back. The girl thoughtfully turned a page and said she was shocked too. The boy looked embarrassed and asked if she was scared. You know, he was trying hard to sort out his thoughts. He looked clumsy, but genuinely wanted to be there for her. Adrian swallowed nervously, waiting to see how the Saintess would react. He gathered his courage and reached out his hand to her. Violet thought he was going to hit her, but he just patted her awkwardly. It was as if even he didn't know what he was trying to do. He frantically smoothed down all the hair sticking up on his head. Adrian promised he would tell him not to do that again next time. The Saintess just replied coldly, saying she didn't believe him. Seeing his surprise, she told him he never listened to her. She lowered her head and added that it wasn't his fault. She now clearly realized that she was different from him. The Saintess felt strongly that she could no longer be friends with Tommy. From now on, she had to be above them and look down on them. She had understood this before, but it was only now that it truly sank in. Adrian watched the girl carefully, thinking she was crying again. He tried to say that she could cry in front of him. The girl shouted at her brother, disagreeing. She looked at the boy and realized he was just trying to comfort her. He had done this before, just in a much stranger way. She was scared at first, but now talking to him made her smile. A few days later, the Marquis's sister finally arrived. The high society lady walked with her daughter. Daniel was the first to greet the guests at the estate. Violet stared thoughtfully at the girl who was her age. She quickly guessed it was Annabella. Before she could even say hello, Annabella ran over and hugged Daniel. Annabella started chattering on about how much she missed him, but the guy made her bow to the Saintess, and her mother immediately seized on this, saying she knew nothing about it. The kid just mumbled not to worry, while the woman ignored her completely and latched onto Daniel. Annabella immediately started complaining that Eddie wasn't at the manor, and the sickeningly sweet nonsense made Adrian want to puke. The Countess scolded him, telling him to be friendlier, so Adrian walked over to Violet with a great flourish, calling her his sister. The girl was completely caught off guard by the sudden affectionate gesture, and he immediately grabbed Violet's hand, telling her they should get out of there. It seemed Annabella was starting to hate the Saintess Violet even more, and as soon as they entered the room, Adrian blurted out how much he hated that girl. He flopped onto Violet's bed, ranting about how much he hated Annabella, and to avoid everything, Adrian hid directly in the Saintess's room. He rambled on again about how he couldn't stand Annabella, and Violet could see he wasn't pretending at all. The Saintess guessed the girl must be hot and that Daniel liked her, and Adrian, as if reading her mind, said a commoner like Violet was much better. He doubled down, saying she was much cuter and much kinder, and flew into a rage over his rude and disrespectful words. She immediately kicked him out of the Saintess's room, and the next morning, Annabella invited the girl for tea. She put on a sweet and innocent act, overjoyed at making a new friend, and the Saintess just smiled and replied that the pleasure was all hers. Annabella was annoyed by the Saintess's impeccable manners, and Violet's gaze happened to fall on a nearby doll. It looked a lot like the one the Marquis had given her not long ago, and it seemed. Annabella noticed the little brat's stare, and she smiled smugly, hoping her brother Ed would come back soon. The girl said he was very nice and always showed her around, which surprised the Saintess, as she knew how cold her own brother was. She immediately thought that he wouldn't have done that if Annabella were his sister, and Violet, lost in her own thoughts, wasn't listening at all. Seizing the opportunity, the guest reached out and offered her the doll, saying she thought Violet particularly wanted it. She smiled and asked her to accept it as a symbol of their new friendship, and not wanting to be rude, Violet took the doll. Just then, Daniel approached them with a servant, and as Annabella rushed towards him again, the Saintess turned away. She hugged him tightly, clinging to him and calling him brother, and she started to cry, begging him to buy her another doll. Annabella sadly pointed out that her doll now belonged to the Saintess, and Daniel couldn't believe the Saintess had taken the doll. The servant started speaking ill of Violet, which caught her mother's attention, and the woman, seeing the girl's doll and the tears in her eyes, immediately jumped to conclusions. She questioned the Saintess about why she was holding Annabella's doll, and the Saintess, confused, explained that the young lady had given it to her. The woman called it nonsense, saying it was a birthday gift from her father, and Daniel, taking Annabella aside, demanded the doll be returned. The little girl insisted she was fine and that she thought the Saintess wanted it, and her mother questioned why she would just give away her favorite doll like that. The Saintess handed the doll back to her, but the woman refused to take it, and the lady passed judgment on Violet, deciding to buy her own daughter a better doll. Everyone gathered around the crying Annabella, oblivious to what had happened, leaving Violet completely isolated, holding the unwanted doll. She returned to the room where Adrian was hiding again, and happily pushed Adrian aside, thrilled by the Saintess's arrival. It seemed even that boy was interested in the girl's arrival, and seeing her dejected look, he asked what doll she was holding. Violet dejectedly told, and she had it all wrong, and she decided to tell them everything that happened, which filled them with righteous indignation. Even Violet didn't know why Annabella decided to do all this, and Adrian called the girl a little demon who ruins everyone's lives, with an adding that the Countess was already ready to pick a fight with her, calling it a true depiction of the power struggles between nobles. Violet was shocked by the absurdity of the whole situation, as now everyone thought she was arrogant, not knowing that she had a much better doll. She was confused, not understanding why this was happening, as her reputation as the Saintess had already plummeted because of her origins. She didn't understand why Annabella needed to make her look even worse, as everyone already liked her, yet she decided to elevate herself by putting the Saintess down. Adrian noticed her confusion and told her to believe in him, and he got angry because she wasn't taking him seriously. Time passed, and Violet's lonely days became somewhat bearable, though her attempts to clear up the misunderstanding with Daniel were futile. Adrian would sneak into her room from time to time, grinning like a madman, and she couldn't figure out what he was up to, but she definitely had her suspicions. One day, he pulled out a worm and started trying to scare Annabella, chasing her all over the place, as if for revenge or something. The kid spotted the nun and gave her a brilliant smile, feeling it was only fair since Violet had been wrongly accused of stealing the doll. The boy kept chasing her until she collapsed on the ground, with Annabella insisting she was just stating facts. She tried to accuse the Saintess of telling her brother a different story, and Annabella also suspected she had ordered him to harass her. Adrian immediately stepped up, saying he was acting entirely on his own, but Annabella retorted that she had been keeping a close eye on their little tricks. She even mentioned the bug he threw in her shoe, and she pointed at Violet, claiming it was all on her orders. The Saintess replied that they had never discussed anything like that with Adrian, and since she spent almost all her time in her room, it was all a lie. The Saintess bluntly asked why she hated her so much for no reason, and she also asked why she cried when she gave her the doll. She added that she already had a doll, a gift from the Marchioness, and Annabella decided to change tactics and just cried harder. Violet was stunned by the guest's manipulative behavior, and she got her wish as Daniel rushed to her side at the sound of her crying. Annabella started saying Adrian and the Saintess were in cahoots, and the maids immediately backed her up, saying they had been bullying the girl. One of them implied the Saintess must have learned such tricks on the streets, and her words angered Daniel, who ordered her to watch her mouth. He looked absolutely terrifying, and the maids immediately started whimpering, while Anne jumped in to defend the Saintess, saying she had nothing to do with it. Another maid chimed in that Adrian was always sneaking into the Saintess's room, and demanded they explain why they thought the Saintess was controlling Adrian. Daniel countered that he couldn't fully trust the word of a maid, and turning to Violet, he snapped, "How long are you going to keep causing trouble?" Daniel repeated the same words, but this time toward Annabella, asking her to go easy on the Saintess. The guy became very agitated and demanded she apologize first, and a fire of injustice burned in Violet's heart, refusing to apologize. Even so, she didn't want to ruin her relationship with Daniel, so she swallowed her pride and apologized to Annabella. The girl coldly said there was a misunderstanding between them, and with those words, a satisfied smile appeared on Annabella's face. She hugged the Saintess, saying all was well, but in her ear, she whispered that a commoner like her shouldn't dream of competing. Afterward, she suddenly pushed the girl away and asked her to grant a request, pointing at Anne and asking to borrow her. While they were here, she said that Anne always took care of her in the capital, and then interjected that she was under direct orders from Ed to escort Miss Violet. Annabella laughed, saying she would talk to him personally, mentioning that he always listened to her requests. Daniel pleaded with Violet, saying it was just for a week, and tried to argue, but he immediately drew the line. He sternly declared that he was in charge of the manor now, and Violet couldn't refuse, as it might harm him, and gasped in surprise when the Saintess agreed, and Annabella, smiling smugly, thanked the girl. She gave the Saintess a triumphant glance, acknowledging the favor she had received, and that evening, Daniel came to Violet's room. He stroked her head, noticing how down she was, and the kid said he was very sorry, but there was nothing he could do. The county of Hartford was in charge of the 4th District of the North Wall, and he couldn't mess up that relationship, as the Countess was a handful and Annabella was just a child. Violet could see how much stress this crap was putting on Daniel, and he promised to make it up to her by finding her other maids. Seeing her tears, he called her his cute little sister, and he kissed her forehead, telling her he was always thinking of her. That night, she felt a glimmer of hope, but it was soon crushed to pieces as the once so kind Daniel forbade Violet from attending the festival. But before that, a whole lot of other things happened as Esmond was walking down a busy street out on an errand. He was suddenly overwhelmed by everything that had happened recently, and the kid remembered Tommy begging for his life. He knew the kid had to be executed, but he just couldn't do it, and Violet's pleas made him hesitate, unable to be ruthless. He could still hear her screaming that Tommy was her friend, and after much thought, he ordered Tommy to be locked up. In the dungeon, he sheathed his sword, glancing back from time to time at his sleeping sister, who had fainted on the floor, lying in a pool of the traitor's blood, and he looked closely at her sad, haggard face, with Ed justifying his actions by saying his father would have done the same. At least that's what he thought before, until he overheard the Saintess's words, and the moment she said she wanted to die, his thoughts changed. No one in his family had ever said anything like that, and even the diligent Daniel always had a smile on his face. From the way she spoke, he knew she truly wanted to die, and he realized his methods had driven her into the depths of despair. Ed left, blaming himself because he was the one who had pushed her to this point, and even now, he knew deep down that he had messed up. He happened upon some commoners talking about preparing for the festival, and Esselman looked up at the sky, remembering that today was the day, and meanwhile, the Saintess was surrounded by maids, who had even swapped the regular menu for her favorite, desserts. She missed, but she didn't want to cause any trouble, and wanting to release a sky lantern, Violet decided to go ask Daniel. She ran off to find her brother, as she used to release sky lanterns when she lived on Flower Street. On the day of the festival, no one paid them any mind, no one insulted them, and on that day, they could feel connected to each other, if only for a moment. She found Annabella already bombarding Daniel with questions, and she stopped mid-sentence to give the Saintess a look of pure contempt. Her gaze nearly burned a hole through the girl, all while clinging to the guy's arm, and he immediately turned to Violet, asking what she wanted. The girl, somewhat absent-mindedly, explained she was here for a sky lantern, and Annabella burst out laughing, asking if she was planning to go to the festival too. The Saintess was stunned, not understanding why she would say that, and she wished the ground would swallow her whole when they told her she couldn't go to the festival. Daniel explained it was because she didn't have Esselman's permission, and he shrugged, saying there was nothing he could do until his brother showed up. This meant she couldn't release a sky lantern this year, and wanted to stay with Violet, but Annabella called her over. The Saintess felt like a third wheel and hurried away, running ahead, feeling it was all too much. It hurt because even on Flower Street, she had never missed it, and she accidentally bumped into Adrian, who was carrying a lantern. He blocked her path, asking if she got a lantern from his brother, and the kid was happily chattering about his lantern until he learned about the rule. He immediately noticed her empty hands, and Adrian, thinking it was all bullshit, told her to take his lantern. Even so, she knew she might be called an instigator again, and Adrian said he wouldn't go either, but the Saintess said she would just be blamed again. The kid knew there was nothing he could do, so he tried to cheer her up, and in the end, the girl reached the library door. She stopped and asked me to tell Daniel to have fun, and the Saintess added that she wouldn't see them off, then slammed the door shut. After a while, she realized their carriage was gone, and the girl walked forward blankly and plopped down on the floor. She hugged herself tightly and then finally started to cry, too sad and angry to hold it in any longer. Last year, she had so much fun with her sisters, and now she was all alone, so lonely and heartbroken she didn't even hear Ed's arrival. He found a girl crying and asked what she was doing there, and Violet, who absolutely did not expect him back today of all days, stared blankly at the guy she currently hated. It turned out he had returned just as the others were leaving, and he asked if everyone was gone, which she confirmed, and he was. Completely stunned when he heard the Saintess was in the library, and he rushed towards her, confused as to why she was left alone. The guy was wondering what she was doing when he heard sobbing, and he looked ahead to see her bawling on the floor. When Ed saw the girl, he felt another pang of guilt, and he asked her why she was always crying alone like that. And the guy approached with his sword, asking, "Where's Anne?" The girl sobbed that she had left with the Countess, and he calmly asked where everyone else was now. She told him directly, and she was surprised when he asked why she was here, and Violet snapped at him that he was the one who told her not to leave. The look on his face made her realize he had no idea, and she burst into tears again, saying she couldn't see anyone there anyway. She added that it was all because of what he did, and the Saintess cried her heart out, saying she didn't even have anywhere to run. She kept asking why he forbade her from doing anything, and the girl didn't realize that he just didn't want that kind of thing to happen. Ed couldn't figure out why Daniel would have abandoned her and followed the order, and he suddenly realized how much influence the Countess's family had. Ed understood that the guest's reaction to Violet was the deciding factor, and if things had gone well, they would have taken her with them. His face darkened as he realized he had messed up again, and after a pause, Ed ordered the girl to get up from the floor. He calmly approached her and held out his large hand, and Violet blamed it all on her loneliness. But his voice sounded somewhat gentle then. She was doubtful, but she decided to take his hand, and after a while, they arrived at a clearing where Ed had suddenly brought her. The Saintess realized he looked just like a normal person now, and she looked around in surprise, having had no idea where they were before. They had been walking uphill for a while, with Ed carrying her the whole way, and he suddenly confessed that he usually practiced his swordsmanship here. This made her understand why all the trees were cut the way they were, and as night fell, Ed started lighting some lanterns. He lit a lantern marked with the Saintess's crest and handed it to her, and she, startled at first, quickly took it. He gently handed her the almost weightless festival item, and Violet finally understood why he had brought her here. There was a specific order to releasing sky lanterns, as the Lord had to go first before all his subjects would release theirs. The girl smiled, wondering if she should wait for Daniel's lantern, and Esselman continued to gaze thoughtfully at Violet. He squeezed the lantern, urging her to release it, and the girl protested, thinking it was too early. Ed said she was dead wrong about something, saying that no matter where she was, she had to be the first one to release her sky lantern. Afterward, he decided to release his own lantern right after hers. And it wasn't until he said that Violet realized something so obvious. Ed had the highest status, while she was on the same level as the king and the pope, and it seemed obvious to her, but she had always overlooked it. She froze in awe when she saw the bright spectacle before her, and Esselman had been intently watching her reaction. She never thought the view would be this spectacular, and as Violet was admiring the lanterns, Ed approached her. He said he was acting in Marquis Ermengarde's stead, and he mentioned that her father held that formal birthday banquet to officially recognize her as one of them. Ed explained that even if they didn't accept her, in his eyes, she was still a very remarkable person, and that jealous haters would always try to bring her down. He wanted to remind her of her own worth with this simple truth, and he had tried to teach her, but he had always messed things up before. The kid hoped she would become strong and realize how amazing she was, and he paused before saying he wouldn't help her. Ed looked her straight in the eye and ordered her to take back what was rightfully hers, and he didn't waste time sympathizing with her. He wanted to light a fire in her. Meanwhile, their little lanterns danced wildly in the air, bumping into each other, and Esselman's lantern happened to fall into the flames. It turned to green smoke with a crackle, turning to ash above their heads, and it seemed both the Saintess and Ed were so engrossed that he didn't even notice. After a while, they finally returned to the manor, where they saw Daniel's carriage had also returned. The Saintess froze when she saw an unbelievable sight, as Annabella stood there in trashy clothes, mortified with shame, and her exhausted mother gave the Marquis's eldest son a very dirty look. She started screaming, accusing the Saintess of making the maids dress the kid like that, and Annabella burst into tears, saying the style was all the rage in the capital. Violet couldn't believe such a crazy coincidence, and Adrian stepped out of the carriage, saying he could barely hold in his laughter. The Countess huffed that it was definitely the Saintess's orders, and Violet immediately retorted that she hadn't done anything, and decided to back her up, saying it was true, and the maid started gushing about the super expensive dress from a hot designer. That remark made them realize it was and who did it, and the Countess continued to accuse the Saintess of all sorts of crimes. She added that her daughter shouldn't have to endure humiliation from a commoner, and the Countess started listing everything she had allegedly accused the Saintess of. Ed whipped his head around, staring at his completely stunned-looking younger brother, and Adrian stated bluntly that he had been the one playing tricks on Annabella all along. Then chimed in that she was the one who mentioned Andre Bona's work, and she declared that Annabella chose the dress herself, and that no one took her doll, with the maid mentioning that the Saintess already had a favorite toy, and Violet was completely blown away by Anne's amazing performance. She defended the Saintess so desperately that Annabelle completely lost control. She started crying, saying the tea Anne had given her was too hot, and explained why and pointed out that she had already warned her. She also mentioned that the maids were all gossiping about the Saintess. What on earth did we do wrong? Annabelle roared, unable to contain her anger. The girl rambled on about all the things she hated, while Anne skillfully refuted her every complaint. When a maid mentioned her weight, Annabella flinched. She couldn't take it anymore and abruptly raised her hand. The girl just stared at the maid with a murderous look, smiling, and did exactly as she was told. She lowered her head. Violet froze. She didn't want this to happen. She saw the force in Annabella's swing. The Saintess, without a second thought, rushed towards the maid. She ran up in time and took the girl's punch with her own face. right in the face. Seeing her get hit so hard, all the brothers tensed up. Only the Countess was happy to see it happen. Annabella pulled back her hand and angrily asked what she was doing. She asked if she had gone soft because she sympathized with Anne's situation. The Saintess calmly told her not to hit her maid. Annabella said that given Anne's behavior, she deserved to be hit. Violet disagreed, saying the maid was just answering a question. She was accused of protecting the maid and disrespecting Annabella. Esselman silently watched the entire argument. The Saintess saw the look in his eyes and remembered that he wouldn't help her. She clenched her fists, knowing she had to protect herself. Violet asked bluntly how much longer she would be ignored. She pointed out that she had already made a great effort to avoid a fight. The girl even mentioned giving up her personal maid to her. She immediately recalled the shameless remarks about Anne. Violet defended herself and demanded an answer. She knew she had to stand up for herself now. She took a step forward. The Saintess walked towards the Countess, mentioning how similar she and Anne were. The girl's face darkened, and she declared that she too would eventually be pulled down from her pedestal. The remark was so outrageous that it left everyone speechless. The Saintess declared that they would pay the price for slandering her bloodline. She added that the Countess needed to be punished for her terrible behavior. The woman protested, but Violet reminded her of the power the Saintess possessed. She pointed out that her authority was equal to that of the king and the Pope. The girl directly quoted a passage from the official history books of Agria. She confidently declared that the kingdom was founded on these principles. It was the first passage in a book that everyone should know by heart. These words were as vital as the air we breathe, simple and clear. Violet had reread them countless times, yet still doubted their authenticity. Here and now, she used these rules to protect herself. When she called herself a symbol and a legend, Ed smiled smugly. The Saintess was indeed the core of Agria, the key that held everything together. The Countess recoiled, not expecting at all that the girl could defend herself. Violet added that her will should be respected more than that of a mere young countess. She reminded the other party that only the king or the Pope could stop her. The girl turned to Annabella and told her to hit Anne again. She said that since she respected the guest's will, her will should also be respected. Annabella flew into a rage, slapped her across the face, and called her an arrogant commoner. Adrian roared in anger, but was held back by Daniel. Annabella smiled smugly, thinking this would break Violet. She felt it was enough to make the girl shrink back in fear. But the moment the Saintess walked towards the Countess, her thoughts changed. She firmly ordered the woman to lower her head. The Countess apologized for her daughter, implying that the servants were watching. Violet saw through her attempt to manipulate and control her. She asked what they had told the servants about her before this. The Countess, realizing her trick hadn't worked, trembled with anger. She looked at Ed hopefully, expecting him to intervene. But to her disappointment, Esselman told her to do as the Saintess said. He added that he had no authority whatsoever to control what she did. Even Violet herself seemed surprised by his move to support her. The Countess clutched the hem of her dress, knowing she had lost. Everyone froze, murmuring about what was happening. The next moment, Violet raised her hand above her head. Annabella began to beg for forgiveness for what she had done. She cried, pleading for her mother. Annabella bluntly asked what she intended to do, as if daring her. The girl knew that either choice could embarrass the Saintess. She thought playing the victim would save her, but all she got in return was a smile. The Saintess gently touched me and told me to get up from the ground. She confessed that she just wanted to play a joke on all of us. The Saintess immediately said that she didn't want something like this to ruin their friendship. She smiled like an angel and asked them to be lenient with Anne. Annabella was so humiliated that her body even began to tremble. Seeing this, Violet smiled smugly and said she had forgotten something. She told the Countess, who was frozen in a bowing position, to relax. The moment she said that, they made to leave in a hurry. The Saintess skillfully hid the turmoil in her heart. The mother and daughter left in a hurry, but Ed stopped them. It seemed Violet wasn't too happy about him interfering. She was caught off guard when he said they had forgotten to bid farewell to the Saintess. You know, according to etiquette, they have to bow before they leave. Ed interjected, saying he didn't want to be responsible for any oversight. The Countess bit her lip in anger and bowed to Saintess Violet. After the courtesy, they fled back to their mansion. Violet swallowed hard, realizing it was finally over. Esselman stared at the girl, lost in thought. He ordered and to treat the Saintess's wounds once they returned to the mansion. Then he left without even a word to Violet. On the way back to the mansion, and couldn't help but recall the events of the festival. Annabella had pleaded to release a lantern with Daniel. When, and heard the chatter about the mark of God appearing, she froze. She looked up and saw the divine symbol itself in the sky. The maid beamed with joy, happy that the Saintess was with them this year. It gave people real hope for good times to come. Right after the Saintess's lantern was the one representing the Marquis. Annabella complained about not being first at the festival. I think Daniel understood the situation and shook his head thoughtfully. He decided to leave the platform to get some peace and quiet. The next day, Violet and were having a blast together. She was summoning flowers while gossiping with and about how quickly the annoying guests had fled. The day after the incident, they had practically cleared out of the estate. Before leaving, though, the two of them had acted all sweet to Violet and stood up and said that they too would be returning to the capital soon. Just then, an excited Adrian came charging towards them. The boy threw himself at Violet, begging her to go to the festival that night. Violet immediately ran off to ask her brother for permission. She doubted he would agree, but decided to try anyway. Adrian tried to promise he could make it happen, but no one really believed him. Afterward, he ran off as fast as he could, as if he were hurt. After his tantrum, Violet went looking for him. She was running so fast that she accidentally bumped into Daniel. He was caught off guard when she started asking where his brother's office was. Violet froze when she saw the displeased look on his face. He came to his senses and asked what she wanted with him. The girl explained that she wanted to ask for permission to go to the festival. Daniel just squeezed her shoulder hard with a threatening air. He was about to refuse her, but Adrian ran up and said that their brother had agreed. It was so unbelievable that everyone was completely stunned. Violet couldn't believe they were actually letting her go. Daniel walked away in a huff, trying to hide his anger. The Saintess was thrilled to finally be able to leave the castle that night. She put on a cloak so no one would recognize her. She had no idea the brothers would be holding her hands. No one had said it would be the three of them, instead of two. Violet was annoyed at being led around like a child, but the sight of the streets changed her mind. She was happy, but worried they'd be recognized and exposed. Esselman reassured her, saying that hardly anyone remembered his face. Adrian, meanwhile, kept joking about how strange they looked. They continued on, and Ed tightened his grip on the girl's hand. He looked at her, noticing she still couldn't fully trust him. A merchant saw him holding her hand so tightly, as if he were afraid of losing her. She suggested they look at some jewelry that ladies like. The woman kept saying how much they looked alike. She asked why he was hiding his sister's pretty face. He explained that she had a big scar and people might make fun of her. The woman was sympathetic and asked her to hold out her hand. In a flash, she placed a bracelet on Violet's wrist. Violet was stunned by how beautiful the piece of jewelry was. Esselman just casually told her to pick something else. The Saintess thought he was just being friendly to the old woman and wanted to buy something. She decided to pick something cheap so as not to be a burden. Before she could say anything, he pulled out a whole bag of gold coins. She immediately grabbed his hand and told him to hide the pouch. She whispered an explanation that they would draw suspicious looks. It was obvious that a commoner wouldn't have gold coins. Ed seemed surprised when she said the shopkeeper wouldn't have change. She realized that it was usually the knights who handled all his needs. The Saintess's face fell, realizing he knew nothing about the lives of common people. To her shock, the guy didn't even know what change meant. She just calmly held out her hand and told him to hand over the bag. The old woman said with a laugh, "That'll be 10 coppers. The Saintess started frantically digging through her brother's pouch. Unfortunately for her, it was filled with nothing but gold coins. She eventually managed to scrape together enough to pay for the jewelry. Somehow, Adrian saw her fighting spirit and said she was acting like a knight. Esselman just repeated change sternly, as if he'd never heard the word before. He very seriously asked Adrian if he knew about this change thing. Unlike him, Adrian knew it meant getting the extra money back if you overpaid. It seemed even the prankster was surprised that Ed didn't know about it. They all tensed up when they heard the loud sound of horse hooves. Violet turned in surprise, trying to figure out what was making the noise. It seemed Ed also sensed that something was wrong. He tensed up. He immediately grabbed the girl's hand and tried to get them out of there. Ed was moving so fast that Adrian had to run to keep up. They kept pushing forward until the Saintess started to run out of breath. They finally found the knights who were chasing after them. The knight loudly announced that it was an emergency. They didn't know why, but they could already feel how bad things were. Meanwhile, Daniel and were heading straight for trouble. Standing before them was the very Duke they despised. He smugly got out of his carriage and walked straight towards the estate. Cesare was smiling smugly, as if he had just decided to show up before the Marquis. Little did he know that the Saintess was wandering around the festival market. When Esselman heard what was happening, he frowned. Violet worriedly suggested they should go back. Adrian was just as confused, trying to figure out what was going on. The kids were surprised when their brother refused. He handed the intel to the knight and told him he was counting on him. Before he could answer, Ed jumped on his horse and galloped away. The guy was left alone with the two little troublemakers. He accepted his fate, and then he was shocked when he saw the Saintess's hand. The knight immediately perked up, realizing he could hold the Saintess's hand. They were so engrossed in their conversation that they completely forgot about the fireworks. The next thing they knew, they were being overwhelmed by the crowd. All Violet could see was the knight's face getting squished, and it looked like he was floating away. Before they knew it, the crowd had separated them. The Saintess tried to pull up her hood to avoid being recognized. She was standing alone in the middle of the street, with no idea where she was. Violet tried to keep walking, but a guy pushed her. He didn't control his strength, and she fell flat on her butt. The guy started yelling at her, saying she had stolen his wallet. The girl said, "Whoa, wait, it wasn't me." The scammer started threatening her with the police and told her to take off her cloak. The Saintess knew everyone would see her silver hair and the bag of gold. The guy saw her panic and kept pressuring her in front of everyone. She froze when someone said, "Stop lying." Standing there was the priest, the man who looked like a god. The scammer realized he had messed up and tried to say someone had stolen from him. The guy just smiled smugly, remembering he had seen him pull the same trick on another girl. He jokingly added that they really should go find a patrolman. As soon as he mentioned the police, the scammer ran off in terror. The priest turned to the girl and said, "Well, look who it is." He locked his gaze on her with his molten amber eyes. The girl thanked him for his help and agreed to go somewhere quiet. The young man confessed that he had been looking for her nonstop. He figured if he came here, they were bound to meet. The Saintess flinched when he said he had almost finished off the guy. He noticed she was startled and apologized for his choice of words. The girl said she had to go back, but he intended to take her with him. She backed away, saying her brother and the knight were waiting for her. The guy replied that he didn't want to hand her over to people she'd have to forget in the temple. For the first time, Violet realized how suspicious he was. Even his silver hair, like that of some saints, unsettled her. Still, she decided to ask him a question to clarify things. He smiled when she asked why they had the same hair color. Just as she asked why no one noticed, he asked if she could see. He moved closer to the girl, demanding she tell him the color of his hair and eyes. The girl froze, but she began to answer his question. He made intense eye contact with her when she mentioned the color amber. The kid was cowering in a corner, saying he was definitely going to get yelled at now. Violet decided to take advantage of his panic and make a run for it. The moment she said she was leaving, he turned and stared at her. He dusted off his clothes and said he'd have another chance eventually. A sudden glint appeared in the kid's eyes as he asked what she thought of him. He begged her to look at him and tell him if he was really cool. She politely agreed, but still didn't want to go with him. He decided to see her out, answering questions about his appearance along the way. The kid said that with divine power, she could also hide her appearance. Her divine power allowed her to see through his lies, but even she couldn't see his true form. If he didn't want her to, their conversation was interrupted by the hurried arrival of a knight and Adrian. The kid immediately started scolding her for getting lost so easily. He was clearly surprised to see her with a priest. The knight composed himself and asked what his business was here. The priest calmly explained everything that had happened to them. Violet bowed politely and thanked him for his help. He looked her straight in the eye and said he was leaving. The Saintess decided it was best to keep what happened between them a secret. Seeing his back again, she realized she never even knew his name. The next day, the mansion returned to its usual hustle and bustle, while working and kept replaying all the recent events in her mind. Things have been crazy ever since Violet came to the estate. The kid even managed to figure out how to use her divine power. She had cried for her friend many times and was even kidnapped, and couldn't say how proud she was of Violet for standing up to the Countess. She was truly happy watching her lady grow. After the 7-day festival, they were all excited for the arrival of spring. However, one question kept bothering Anne. She couldn't figure out why Violet was so down, and tried to probe, but the Saintess wouldn't talk. From her answers, the maid guessed it had nothing to do with returning to the capital. She could see how lost in her own thoughts Violet was. That same day, their carriage finally headed for the capital. Unfortunately, and couldn't get anything out of her about what was bothering her. It broke her heart to see the girl's face grow more and more somber. The maid perked up when the Saintess called her name. To her surprise, the Saintess firmly promised to protect her, and immediately started racking her brain, trying to figure out why she would say that. The Saintess sat up straight when she heard a knock on the carriage. Esselman startled her, saying they had arrived at the mansion. After the long journey to the capital, they could finally get out of that carriage, and looked ahead and finally understood why her lady had been so worried. Standing before them was a furious countess, along with her daughter and the Marquis. She dramatically dabbed at her eyes, recounting the humiliation she had suffered. The woman begged the Marquis to consider if there was still a place for the Saintess in their family. She told him how they had threatened to hit her in front of all the servants. The Saintess felt her days were numbered, as this would surely anger the Marquis. After hearing Caroline's side of the story, he turned to Ed for confirmation. The woman said with great exaggeration that it wasn't his fault. She claimed the Saintess was trained in the Flower District to manipulate men. Caroline said it would be much better if he escorted her to the temple. Adrian immediately defended the girl, saying she had done nothing wrong. He pointed out that it was his aunt who had neglected Saintess Violet. The Saintess wondered if the Marquis would believe it and let her off the hook. She decided to try and defend herself, recalling how the maids had humiliated her in the past. The Countess pointed at her as if she were the biggest liar on earth. She smiled smugly and asked if she wanted to slap her again. Violet lowered her head while the Countess continued to taunt her. She couldn't help but wonder if she would have to go through something similar in the temple. She figured the Marquis wouldn't tolerate the kind of humiliation his sister had suffered. The man turned to her and said she already knew what to do. He stunned everyone because he wasn't speaking to Violet, but to Caroline. The woman was completely stunned, frozen in place as he ordered her to kneel. He confessed that he had only waited for the Saintess's arrival to not kick her out. Byron said sternly that she had officially crossed the line. He pointed out that her actions showed exactly what she thought of the Saintess. The woman began to beg for forgiveness, saying how ashamed she felt. Annabella decided to play the pity card and burst into tears. The Countess had a "how dare you tell me to kneel in front of my own daughter" look on her face. The man held back his disgust for these people. With extreme hypocrisy, he gently patted the crying Annabella on the head. Then, unexpectedly, the Marquis suggested she kneel in her mom's place. He said she was just as reckless and foolish as her mother. Bjorn said, "Did you really think I wouldn't find out what you did?" He accused the Saintess of lying, saying she was tormenting her, and asked if she dared to say these things in front of the king. He made her realize that they were all gravely mistaken. Bjorn once again emphasized just how important the Saintess was. The Countess called Violet a commoner of low birth, whose process of becoming a Saintess was highly suspicious. Bjorn retorted sharply, saying he acknowledged the child as his daughter. The Countess couldn't believe he would defend the child so fiercely. Despite the tense atmosphere, Violet felt a hint of warmth from his words. The man calmed down and said that she was now living in their manor. Not only that, but the Saintess had also been given the Ermengarde family name. All of this combined meant she had become the Marquis's daughter. Violet had never imagined he would speak of her so gently. The Marquis completely refuted the Countess's arguments. Violet's mind kept replaying him calling her his daughter. She didn't even immediately notice that Ed was holding her hand. The girl realized he was gazing into her eyes again, and her face couldn't help but blush. She was shocked when she realized he had no reason to do so. He just gave her hand a squeeze, but it was as if she instantly calmed down. The Marquis announced that the Countess was no longer a member of the Ermengarde family. He added that their family would not even accept her as a guest. The man glared at her, saying he would never forget how she had humiliated his daughter. Caroline couldn't understand how he could treat that commoner as his own daughter. She knew he wasn't the type to make empty threats or change his mind easily. In order not to lose her status, she decided to swallow her pride. Caroline stopped in front of the Saintess and bowed deeply. She pleaded with the Saintess to forgive her and her daughter. The Marquis looked at Violet thoughtfully, as if she were the one in charge. The girl told her to stand up and said she didn't want to hear any more of it. The woman silently touched the floor and then slowly stood up as she walked past the Saintess. Her eyes looked as if she were seeing the person she hated most. Caroline left, secretly vowing to make Violet pay for this humiliation. After she was gone, the Marquis told everyone to return. Everyone breathed a sigh of relief and hurried back. Only Violet remained frozen in place. Feeling that everything was her fault, she apologized. The girl began to sob, admitting to her father that she had messed up. The man knew it wasn't her fault, but she was used to blaming herself for everything. He gently stroked her head and asked what she was talking about. The Marquis smiled and said he had read every one of her letters, which all said how much she missed him. The Saintess thought it was just a formality and didn't understand why he was laughing. She became flustered when she realized she had been completely tricked by Anne. Before she could speak, the Marquis pulled her into his arms. He said he never knew what it felt like to receive such a letter from a daughter. The Marquis smiled gently and said he missed her too. After the sweet moment, they returned to the palace together. Violet was very embarrassed that he was still carrying her. The Saintess, blushing like a beet, asked him to put her down. The butler interjected that she was unwell and also asked him to put her down. He set her down and suggested she eat with everyone. The Marquis sensed her unease and guessed she was still embarrassed. The girl looked dejected and asked if it was because they didn't want to see her. The Marquis froze, shocked that she would even think that was the issue. The man knelt down, saying he just wanted her to feel comfortable and at ease while eating. Because of his words, Violet's world, where everyone hated her, began to change. She had been afraid they would reject her because she had nothing. She found out that Finn was a liar and the Viscountess was a tyrant. She also learned of the kindness of Countess Raquel, a person she had never met. She needed answers, but had never truly sought them. She decided to make a change and asked her father if they could have dinner together. The old man smiled, happy that they had finally cleared up the misunderstanding. He gently squeezed her hand and agreed to let her eat with everyone. That very night, she met the goddess again in her dream. The mysterious girl was gently stroking the Saintess's hair. Violet told her that even when she was full, Adrian would still sneak her food. She said she was no longer the girl who cried from being treated poorly. She was now stronger, smarter, and more confident in herself. She explained that Adrian only did that because he cared about her. Violet already knew that, but it still felt good to hear someone else say it. She was grateful that a goddess would meet her in her dreams. The thought of a new family waiting for her filled her heart with warmth. In real life, she stiffened, sensing something flying toward them from behind. Violet shuddered in fear, as if something bad was about to happen. The goddess noticed the girl had suddenly become tense. Violet tried to sniff the air and caught a foul smell. She was very familiar with that smell, having even smelled it in her dreams. After that, her dream came to an abrupt end, and she hurriedly started her new day. After everything that happened yesterday, she felt a heavy pressure. The entire atmosphere felt completely different than before. The servants who had been indifferent to her in the past were now fawning over Saintess Violet. She smiled when the good old chef, Jack, greeted her. He pointed out that she had grown quite a bit since they last met. Wanting to curry favor with her, Jack asked what she wanted for dinner. The girl smiled and said that whatever he made, she knew it would be delicious. Jack was moved by these sincere and sweet words. His 15 minutes of fame were immediately stolen by a group of enthusiastic maids. The child was overwhelmed by all the sweet talk. Hearing the women's questions, she said she just wanted to come here alone. They immediately surrounded her, offering to accompany her. The maids immediately threw a barrage of suggestions at her on how to pass the time. To escape all the attention, she took off running, saying only no. Violet, still thinking about the dream, decided to check out the church. It seemed she hadn't even realized she had walked all the way here. All this attention was still a real burden for her. She decided to push open the door and enter the church. The place was empty except for a statue of Saintess. It was the first Saintess of Agria, a true legend. Violet couldn't help but wonder why her eyes were closed. She gazed at the statue and realized she looked exactly like the goddess from her dream. Violet wondered if she could ever become someone like her. She turned around when Daniel said he knew she was here. She wanted to understand why he looked so upset. The man patted her head and said she had changed a lot. He added that she looked like a stranger, but she denied it. Daniel's smile vanished, as if he were angry with the Saintess. He clenched his fists and asked if she truly believed in God. Seeing Violet freeze, Daniel glanced at the statue. He told her that on the day his mother was dying, he had prayed to that god. He knew the whole family was praying for the same thing, but the god did not answer the child. It felt like no one in the world was more ignored than him. He looked at the girl sadly and said he didn't believe in God. The Saintess said nothing, but she saw all his sorrow and pain. Wanting to soothe his soul, she caressed her brother's cheek. He squeezed her fingers and said he loved her more than anything. Daniel felt her trembling and asked if she knew that. He kissed her small hand and possessively said she was his. Seeing that creepy look in his eyes, the girl felt fear once again. She remembered what Malum had said when he called her his. She remembered that all-encompassing fear extending its claws toward her. That fear seized her like a predator catching its prey. He stared at her with red eyes, saying she couldn't escape. Lost in it all, she pushed Daniel away with all her might. It was as if he had become a completely different person. The girl started to tremble, apologizing for rejecting him. She apologized again and then ran away as fast as she could. A few days later, the Marquis wanted to talk to her. Just the two of them sat down with some delicious tea. She saw the Marquis was pensive and didn't know why she had been summoned. After reading the letter before lunch, he had been sitting there sullenly. Finally, the man announced they had visitors today. He said dejectedly that 10 high priests were coming over. The Saintess flinched, realizing the Marquis couldn't refuse. He used to refuse them, but they insisted she receive theological training. The temple insisted that a high priest must be assigned to teach her exclusively. The girl knew she couldn't just refuse. She felt sad knowing the Marquis was so upset because of her. The Marquis froze when she asked him who she should choose. It was as if she had just given him an idea on how to take back control. He guessed they had already chosen the next tutor. The Saintess blushed, as she had thought it was her choice to make. She berated herself for saying something so absurd. She said she had made a mistake, but the Marquis actually praised her. He looked at her and said the choice should absolutely be hers. That same day, they began to prepare for the visit. Her mind was filled with the difficult choice ahead. The temple divided Agria into 10 regions, each with its own main temple. Each region was ruled by a high priest, ensuring everyone followed the rules. It was extremely rare for all of them to gather in one place, something that had almost never happened, not even for the king had ever seen something so important. When the girl heard her father's voice, she knew it was time to go. Hearing that the guests had arrived, she turned around nervously. Violet silently followed her father to the door. The Marquis gave her some support, saying she would do great. Seeing her father so confident, she relaxed a little. He warned her that the priest would try to pressure them. He said they had to obey her command. Without any question, Bjorn mentioned that all the high priests would side with the temple, and only Esteban seemed pure of soul and was friendly to them. He told her to remember he had a scar on his forehead and was very young. The girl recalled those words again, preparing herself for the meeting. Every member of the Ermengarde family held their breath, waiting for the priests to arrive. Violet felt the heavy responsibility on her shoulders. She saw the sunlight and promised herself she would get through this. A group of men bowed before her, and she felt that everything would be all right. The leading high priest greeted the messenger of God. After the pleasantries, they were all invited into the main hall. Violet scanned the crowd, looking for the man with the scar on his forehead. Before long, she finally found the person she was looking for. She could feel the power emanating from him was far stronger than the others. High Priest Dublin declared that the Marquis could no longer ignore the Lord. He accused him because the Saintess still knew nothing of theology. Violet explained that her training was delayed because she was illiterate. She admitted her education was not yet sufficient to learn the words of God. However, the priests all accused her, telling her to focus on her studies. Violet clenched her fists, thinking they were no different from the guys on Flower Street. She knew that no matter how hard she tried, all they wanted was the image of a Saintess. The girl refused to satisfy them and told them they were right. She added that without more training, she wouldn't be able to give her all. Finally, she announced the need to choose a tutor for herself. Everyone around was stunned by her confident and risky decision. Dublin snapped that she wasn't smart enough to make the right choice. The girl froze, stumped by his question about criteria, which she hadn't considered. She had known from the start which priest she wanted to choose. Violet once again remembered the power she had sensed, and everything became clear. She said that this time, she really couldn't rely on her own mind. She added that it didn't matter even if she had those qualities. The Saintess declared that she believed everyone was qualified to train her. She said she would choose her tutor based on the power God had bestowed upon each of them. Dublin frowned, realizing she had cornered them. A priest raised his hand to ask for clarification. It was that same priest who proposed that they should cover their faces. The Saintess twitched, feeling her plan falling apart. He added that she didn't need to know who they were, or what they looked like. The others supported him, suggesting they turn around and put on their cloaks. The girl looked at her father in confusion, seeking support. He gave her a confident nod, as if telling her to just agree. A minute later, each of the priests stood before her, their heads bowed low. The Saintess swallowed hard, feeling the weight of responsibility. Bjorn decided to give her a push, ordering her to make her choice. Next, she began to scan the power of each of them. She needed to find a priest with a large amount of pure energy. Finally, she opened her eyes with delight, feeling she had found him. She walked forward without a word and announced her choice. Her brothers all watched with bated breath as the girl's fate was decided. She stood before the man, and then everyone removed their robes. Violet couldn't believe her eyes when she realized she had chosen the wrong person. She noticed High Priest Esteban standing far away. She couldn't understand what had happened, as he was the one who had been emitting the strongest energy. Violet began to rack her brain, trying to figure out who she had mistakenly chosen. The high priest she had chosen bowed and took her hand. He removed his robe, revealing his red hair to everyone. Everyone was stunned when they heard the voice of Duke Chase-Ray. It seemed even the priests were shocked by this turn of events. In that moment, Violet knew their success was impossible. Chase-Ray grinned, reminding her how he had promised to return to her.